Chapter 547. By the time Weischer woke up, he didn't know how much time had passed. He was so engrossed in his thoughts on the park bench that he fell into a deep sleep. When he woke up, he was still full of the drowsiness after a long nap and didn't want to move. He seemed to have had a dream. Weischer dreamed of Ai Ching, Fu Yi, Lily, Sr., and even little Amber and everyone else. In the end, he vaguely dreamed of Tangi. She also said that she wanted to give him benefits, but was flatly rejected by the heartless Weischer. She could only pull Weischer's sleeve and apologize with tears in her eyes. It should have been a good dream. In the dream, Weischer was carefree, singing and eating hot pot happily with everyone, full of hope and future and laughter. But at the end of the dream, when everyone met, the atmosphere seemed to be abnormal. He didn't know why. Wasn't he very happy before? But suddenly he didn't feel happy. Then Weischer woke up in fright. He vaguely remembered that something terrible had happened, but he couldn't remember. Subconsciously, he touched his neck and then breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, his head was still there, but his heart was cold. What was with this strange feeling? He scratched his head and couldn't figure it out. Soon, he noticed that something was wrong with his body. He looked down and saw that he didn't know when the blanket had covered him. He was at a loss for a long time before he noticed the thing beside him. It was a carefully wrapped lunchbox. When he picked it up, he could feel a burst of warmth. He held it up and looked at the simple and elegant appearance, as well as the faint smell of perfume. The figure of the girl in the gray skirt emerged in his memory. Yuan was here. After taking out his phone, Weischer found that it was already 3 o'clock in the afternoon. She probably didn't want to disturb Weischer's sleep after coming over, so she left the lunchbox behind. It's good to have a student. In the gradually emerging hunger, Weischer opened the lunchbox and dug into it. In the process, he picked up a stack of briefs under the lunchbox and flipped through them. The cabin in the woods was left here. The report recorded in great detail all the events that had taken place on the Iron Crystal platform after Weischer had left, including the transfer and change of positions, as well as the analysis of the 2 meetings. The focus was on recording the results of the negotiations and the relevant process, as well as the arrangements and duties of the students, so that Weischer could grasp the specific situation. As he watched, Weischer's desire to usurp the throne started to go awry again. It could only be said that one is marked by the company one keeps. It was all because of the cabin in the woods. After finishing her meal, Weischer tossed the report aside and saw a few figures not far away. A man in a black suit, sunglasses, and boots stood there like a shadow. A few crows landed on the branches beside him, waving their wings excitedly and saying something to him. When the black shadow heard this, it would occasionally open its mouth and give a few suggestions, but no sound came out. The members of the legal department didn't like to talk much to begin with. Occasionally, when they communicated with the infernal realm, they would use origin substances to express their intentions. However, they seemed to be chatting quite happily with each other. When the crows heard this, they danced and jumped around in place, as if they had been imparted with some strange experience. They had grown. After sensing that Weischer had woken up, the dark spirit from the legal department nodded politely, then turned invisible and returned to Weischer's shadow. The crows flew over and landed next to him. After cawing twice, they raised their feet. Around the foot of one of them was a tag wrapped in string. On it was a message from the researchers in the research lab. Modification blueprints have been drafted. Please come to area B4-01 for further discussion. After Weischer finished reading, his spirits were lifted. He folded the blanket on his body and stuffed the lunchbox and the documents into his saddlebag. He couldn't continue to sleep because of this news. After quickly washing his face, he rushed to the upper deck. Before leaving, He had already talked to the researchers about the Ratman's intentions. He hadn't expected them to produce the blueprints so quickly. It was practically godlike speed. After passing through several layers of security, he smelled a suffocating smell of blood outside the laboratory door. He pushed open the door and entered. All he saw was a workshop that looked like a slaughterhouse. There were all kinds of organs everywhere, as well as other messy tools. In the center of the room was an unconscious rat man that had been completely dismembered. It was still alive. At least its heart was still beating. It was probably the few lucky ones who had survived with serious injuries. In the spirit of recycling, Huaisher had sent all of them here. It seemed that with the help of these samples, the research had made quite a bit of progress. This place looks quite familiar. Huaisher scratched his head. He couldn't remember where he had seen this scene before. Seeing that Huaisher didn't show any abnormalities, the researcher in charge of the laboratory was also quite surprised. In this place, the biological laboratory was mainly responsible for the dissection and research of the native hell creatures. Sometimes, the results of the experiments were even more unacceptable. Even the members of the exploration team, who had experienced all kinds of dangers and trials, would feel uncomfortable when they saw the scene here. There were only a few people who could be as calm as Huaisher. "Mr. Huaisher, please take a seat." He left the operating table, put down the saw in his hand, took off his gloves, and led Huaisher to the rest area in the corner. After changing out of his mask, he asked, "Coffee or tea? Anything. Let's have some water." Huaisher sat down with a cup of water. He looked around and sighed. In particular, the head soaked in preservative attracted his attention. He could see that the knife was very carefully cut. There was no damage or destruction. The person who did it must be an expert. It's rare to see someone as calm as you. The middle-aged scholar sighed. "When I was studying in the flesh workshop, I've seen more tragic scenes than this. Why is there always a fuss?" "Ah, maybe I'm used to it." Huaisher scratched his head and asked, "How should I address you?" "Marvel. Just call me Marvel." The scholar got up and swept the messy things on the table aside. "Let's get down to business. Take a look at this. This is the plan I carried out based on the samples of the ratmen." As he moved, a few dissecting diagrams that were pressed under the table appeared in front of Huaisher. In the diagrams, the ratmen's size had expanded to almost twice their current size. Looking at the scale, they were even taller than Huaisher by 2 heads. The internal organs and bones in their bodies had also changed drastically. They had almost become a different kind of creature. The murderous aura was overwhelming. It was unbelievable. During the experiment, we found that the fusion of these ratmen's external organs had exceeded the average range. It's really incredible. Therefore, after discussing with other laboratories, we came up with a new set of transformation plans. Marvel excitedly pointed at the diagrams and said, "Limited by their original physique, we decided to use auxiliary methods to increase their height. The inner alloy skeleton will be gradually stretched during the operation. Then 2 lymphatic systems and ganglia will be added on the left and right sides of the neck and spine. On the inner side of the spine, there will be a cerebellum that will be used to control and manage the movements of the lower body to avoid any delay. The transformation of the Black Death core relies too much on the shamans in their tribe. We decided to use the organs of other creatures to transform them. First, the muscles. We have already obtained permission from the Ivory Tower. The Athens branch sent us a new artificial muscle synthesis law and structure diagram. The efficiency of the muscles is more than 10 times higher than the original ratmen's muscles. Together with the increased body, the strength of their bench press can reach more than 2 tons. The 2 new lung lobes came from the samples of the scaled lion preserved in the laboratory. Apart from increasing the blood and oxygen exchange function, we added 2 extra secretory glands that can be used as tranquilizers or stimulants according to the needs. As for the eyes department, we used the advanced model released by the Academy last year. We added infrared vision, elemental vision, and advanced dynamic vision, allowing them to detect danger on the battlefield immediately. The auxiliary internal skeletal system can transmit nerve signals through the spinal cord without any obstruction, allowing them to learn all kinds of standard tactical movements in a short period of time. It also strengthens their aiming and throwing abilities. If they have enough time, they can even learn the American Army boxing. Of course, that is meaningless in the abyss. The next important thing is the skin transformation. Now, our artificial skin can perfectly adapt to the dangers of strong acid and alkali, the pre-made impact-resistant shell under the skin, and the outer layer of hair can perfectly withstand bullets designed for close-range shooting. The most important thing is the alchemy array in the skull. We can preset a curse resistance array here, greatly increasing their resistance to negative effects. The more he spoke, the more excited Marvel became. Originally, the transformation of the Rat-Man army had only been something that Weischer had casually mentioned. However, after the negotiations and under the coordination of the Chief of Staff, the transformation had greatly increased the priority, becoming the most important thing at the moment. After all, they were currently the most convenient cannon fodder on hand. How could they be used so easily? They had to increase their own abilities and value. Thus, with the combined efforts of everyone, the Rat-Man Transformation Plan version 4. Zero appeared in front of Weischer overnight, when the biologists and alchemists in the Iron Crystal constellation who were so bored that they were about to grow hair saw this project. Their eyes turned green with excitement. They added a little bit more. And in the end, almost all of the Rat-Man's body parts had been forcibly modified, strengthening them to the limit of what was theoretically possible. No matter how weak a Rat-Man was, after being modified, he could become a steel warrior that could charge through a rain of bullets. Even Weischer was stunned when he saw this. Looking at the mess of things on the paper, he couldn't tell that it was a Rat-Man at all. He lowered his head and looked at the blueprint over and over again. After a long time, Weischer scratched his head. I have to say, this is indeed a little unexpected. He scratched his head, but he couldn't help but frown. But I still feel like it's a little lacking. After thinking for a long time, he raised his head and said, "It's lacking something." Marvel was stunned. Chapter 548. But there's more to it. What's missing? Is it the stench of the Rat-Man? Weischer was still not satisfied with the result that everyone had come up with after putting in so much effort. Weir instinctively wanted to refute, but when he thought about how Weischer wasn't a layman who didn't know anything and wanted to casually criticize him, he forcefully restrained himself. After a long silence, he asked, "Then, do you have any suggestions?" "Sorry, I didn't mean to pick on you." Weischer scratched his head and thought for a moment. "I just feel that it's a little too dry. See, since you're looking for excitement, why don't we go all the way?" Huh. Marvel was stunned. They had almost transformed the Rat-Man into an abyssal muscle lord. How was it not thorough enough? For example, look at these bones. Weischer rubbed his chin and thought for a long time. Since we've already transformed so much, there's no need to pay attention to the original taste of the bones, right? Many physical skills are limited by the strength of the bones and can't be used. But why can't we completely transform the Rat-Man's bones? I remember that there's an alchemy solvent that can transform bones into metal, right? I think it's called iron marrow replacement solvent. As a professional metal alchemist, Weischer was very familiar with this. You see, as long as we completely transform the bones into metal, there's still a lot of room for us to work on the other parts. But Marvel turned back and said, the alchemy medicine you mentioned needs to be combined with a larger scale of ritual and ritual. Otherwise, the accuracy won't be so high. After the transformation, the bones may become pure iron ingots. Even the hematopoietic cells in the bone marrow and the external nerves will be killed. You don't have to worry about that. Weisher smiled and raised his hand. In the palm of his hand, countless fine pieces of iron grew like crystals. I'm a professional. He had been using the sealing hand to assist in alchemy experiments for a long time. The application of the medicine and the range of tempering was a piece of cake. As long as there were a few more directional runes on the ritual, it would be fine. We need to discuss this further. As a scholar, Marvel didn't dare to agree immediately. He turned around and walked towards the conference room. But after taking 2 steps, he turned back and looked at Weisher. Why don't you join us? Perfect. Weisher put away the blueprint, raised his head, and smiled. I also have a lot of inspiration to share with everyone. On the operating table, the ignorant rat man suddenly trembled. It was as if he had sensed the arrival of a nightmare. The efficient meeting lasted for a total of 4 hours. For hours later, the leader of the gargoyles suddenly received a signal from Weisher inviting it to the infirmary. After the bat-winged demon squeezed through the door of the infirmary with great difficulty, he saw a row of scholars and alchemists who had been waiting for a long time raise their heads in unison, revealing strange and chilling gazes. It was as if he was looking at a white mouse. Something is wrong with all of you. The gargoyle felt a chill at the back of its head. Before it had time to raise its guard, it saw Weisher, who was wearing a white coat, standing at the front with a smile on his face. He raised his head and asked, "You're here? Are you interested in taking a CT scan?" Yes, of course I am." The gargoyle nodded frantically, afraid that it would be dissected by this group of people in front of it if it hesitated. By the time it left the infirmary, trembling in fear, an hour had already passed. During this process, it cooperated with all of the strange examinations, including but not limited to CT scans of various parts, color ultrasounds, and even deeper origin substance samples. Occasionally, the gazes of the scholars were even more frightening than when they were dissecting a living being. The pressure on its mind was at its peak. When it was finally told that it could leave, it still couldn't believe it. After repeatedly confirming that they wouldn't be subjected to any strange experiments or dissecting, it ran away faster than a rabbit. The ivory tower had too many tricks up its sleeves. If it weren't for the restrictions of the contract, it would have just run away. After it left, the scholars in the infirmary exchanged their opinions. Finally, they looked at Weisher and said, "Your proposal is theoretically possible, and it also avoids the situation of needing to take all kinds of medicine to maintain it during its 4-month shelf life. If it is maintained well, it can even be used for more than 10 years. But without testing it, we still have no way of confirming whether or not this method is feasible. Then let's give it a try. True knowledge comes from practice." As he spoke, Weisher looked over the medical records of the seriously injured in his hands. He picked out the lucky person who was about to become the new era Ratman. Which lucky group member would it be? It really made him look forward to it. Tempered bones, 3 layers of subbrains, neural structure optimization, organ transplantation, immune system and circulatory system modification, and finally, all kinds of artificial devices implanted, as well as all kinds of alchemy equipment used continuously throughout the entire process. From the inside out, all of the cumbersome and useless organs were replaced. The reproductive system was removed. It was not like they were going to give birth. The digestive system was removed and replaced with a more advanced source substance supply system. after completely replacing all the parts of the Ratman's body, what was produced was a brand new creature born from the original Ratman's foundation. A powerful tool, Rat created by relying on the Ratman's super adaptability to external organs. In the operating room that could be considered the most advanced, even if it was repeated several times in the entire territory, the two scholars who were the chief surgeons and Weischer, who was the assistant throughout the entire process, had stitched up the last thread. It had already been 8 hours. It was their first time doing it, and they lacked experience. Many things could not be replaced by machines, so it took a little longer. If they were given a few more chances, they would be able to shorten the time to less than 4 hours. At this moment, looking at the 3-meter-tall creation in front of them, an indescribable pride suddenly rose in their hearts. The tempered bones all over their body were enough to walk freely in the harshest environment, and the most advanced artificial muscles gave them invincible strength. Just these two things installed on their bodies were already dozens of times more valuable than the Ratman's net worth. Not to mention the layers of alchemy arrays attached to the bones during the process, as well as the large group of cloned organs from various hells in the body. Even the most powerful troll in the Black Death Corps could not be compared to this tool, Rat in front of them. This was already an out-and-out war machine, a battlefield meat grinder and a sower of destruction. If it were not for the special situation, this kind of experiment with absolutely no cost-performance ratio would not have been approved by the purser. After hollowing out an old-fashioned computer and replacing it with the most advanced configurations, the final result was as unaesthetic as a stitched monster. But to be honest, it was really too interesting. No wonder there were so many Frankenstein monsters who liked to mess around. Who could resist this kind of temptation to do whatever they wanted? They could only be thankful that there was no Bill of Rights or ethical system in the abyss. Although the Ratman had the word human in it, in reality, they were not human at all. Anyway, they were all seriously injured to the point of dying, so they did not have any psychological burden at all when they worked. Wasn't this also for them to better contribute to the ivory tower? As long as they worked more, they would be able to regain their freedom as soon as possible. Weischer and the others did not even collect the upgrade fee. This was an act of benevolence. As for the scholars who were yelling about how the flesh was weak, they were just there to join in the fun and cause trouble. It was like a game where you could live for $10. They just wanted to see how much they could strengthen the cannon fodder Ratman. In the end, everyone was very satisfied with the results. There was only one problem left. This Ratman is stupid. The scholar in charge of the surgery held a taser and poked the awakened Ratman back and forth. There is no reaction to any stimulation. Let's check the origin substance. The origin substance is still in the silent state of anesthesia. No, even soul stimulation is useless. Let's try some morphine. It's not like this is emergency treatment. What's the point of going through so much trouble? If you ask me, drink a can of chili powder, and there will be a reaction. Damn, chili powder guy. Aren't you from the mechanical transmission department? How did you end up here? I'm just giving you a suggestion, and I'll leave. Hey, why are you guys chasing me away? I want to see Weischer. I want to see the great Grandmaster. I've contributed to the Ivory Tower. I've contributed to the Iron Crystal Constellation. The door slammed shut. After everyone else was chased away, everyone began to examine the awakened Ratman. In the end, they came to a helpless conclusion. There's nothing we can do. Instincts like reflexes still exist, but the origin substance has already collapsed. Marvel took off the mask on his face. There are too many steps to the modification process. The Ratman's consciousness probably collapsed halfway through. Mr. Weischer, we still need to adjust the configuration a bit. There was nothing they could do. The Ratman's innate constitution was just too weak. After all, They were a race that did not have any good points apart from making soldiers. The only reason they had been able to survive until now was because of their ability to reproduce. They lived faster than they died, and their environmental tolerance and adaptability were maxed out. However, they were still weak in nature. The Iron Crystal constellation scholars had accidentally gotten too excited and modified too much. In the middle of the process, the Rat Man could not withstand the pressure of the alchemy array, and the origin substance directly collapsed. It was even worse than a brain-dead vegetable. After brain death, at least the origin substance would remain. If they were lucky, they might even be able to form something similar. However, after the origin substance structure collapsed, they would basically be dead. All that was left was a sturdy husk. There's nothing we can do. It's not like we're driving a Gundam. We can't just stuff any parts into it. Let's try the lower configuration version. Mr. Weischer? Mr. Weischer, are you listening? In the silence, Weischer stood in front of the operating table, looking down at the massive rat man in front of him. It was as if he could not accept the reality of this failure and was stunned. Marvel sighed. He was just about to go up and say a few words of consolation. Experiments always fail. Rome wasn't built in a day. When Weischer turned around, he saw a strange light in Marvel's eyes. It was hard to hide his excitement. What did you just say? Rome wasn't built in a day. Did you say that? Ahem, I was just about to say it. I just said to try the lower configuration version. What about the previous sentence? It's not like we're driving a Gundam. That's right. Weischer clapped his hands excitedly, almost dancing with joy. However, it was not because of the breakthrough in the experiment in front of him, but because he had suddenly found a new path for his large group of subordinates. Ghosts, didn't they have to possess a body? He waved his hand, and a burning flag appeared. It was suddenly nailed into the ground of the operating theater. Then, the crow with the candle emerged from the burial ground and landed on Weischer's shoulder. Ga. It cried out and tilted its head to look at Weischer. It did not know what was going on. Weischer raised his hand and pointed at the experimental subject in front of him. After the crow with the candle cried out, the flame on the candlestick at the corner of its mouth suddenly jumped and expanded, covering the entire crow. Then, as the flame was extinguished, the crow with the candle turned into a wisp of gray mist. Under Weischer's command, it floated down to the empty body below. It sank into it. At that moment, the burly giant rat's eyelids trembled. New ripples suddenly appeared on the originally straight line of origin form reflection. It opened its eyes with difficulty, but it had reached its limit. The body was too large and heavy. It was difficult for a single crow with the candle to carry such a huge burden. Then, add a few more. Weischer waved his hand, and several ghosts jumped out. Their origin form with the dream attribute was activated, and their entire silhouettes became translucent. They formed a mist and rushed into it. 1, 2, 3, until 6 ordinary crow were added. The war machine on the operating table suddenly stood up and fell to the ground. Like a newborn, it waved its arms and legs wildly, struggling to adapt to this new body. After a long time, it finally supported itself against the wall and crawled up. Its head, which was covered in stitches, stiffly looked around. Its dull eyes gradually turned scarlet, which came from a nightmare. Then, it lit up with a fanatical light. Caw! It opened its mouth and used a hoarse and sharp voice to shout out its first words after coming to this world. Holy! At that moment, intense origin form fluctuations rose from the giant rat man's body. As the empty shell was unified by the crows, the flesh and the soul fused into one, and an indescribable change appeared in its body. No, it should be that some mechanism in the abyss had been activated. It was operating here, and a miracle had descended. As it twitched and trembled violently, the giant rat man suddenly bent down. The hair on its body rapidly grew, covering it and enveloping it. Amidst the intense pain, it knelt on the ground and sincerely praised Huaishur. On Huaishur's head, the prince's crown that had disappeared for a long time reappeared. It lit up and emitted a dazzling light. In the distance, the mighty voice of paradise sounded. Under the illumination of the light, the emblem of paradise faintly appeared on the rat man's head. On that huge body, countless long hair interweaved together. In the end, it formed a thick and clumsy puppet suit. It was similar to the one he had seen on a kitten. However, it looked completely different from a kitten. Instead, it was black and white, and it was wearing red suspenders. Its hands and feet were long, and there were 2 huge round ears on its head. There were no traces of man-made features. It was as if it was born like this, and that head looked quite similar to the 3 circles Huaishur had drawn when he summoned the legal department, as if they had sensed something. The spirits of the legal department, who had been sleeping in the shadow of Huaishur, suddenly appeared here. They were aggressive and had gloomy expressions on their faces, as if they were here to collect a debt. However, when they saw Huaishur and the mutated rat man, they revealed an unprecedented sluggish expression. It was unbelievable. After a long time, they raised a sign and held it upside down. Chapter 549. What the hell? What's going on? What should I do? On the dull faces of the spirits from the legal department, Huaishur's favorite 3 questions in life appeared so vividly. It made people sigh. What goes around comes around. You guys also have a day where you become emojis. What's wrong? Huaishur looked at the mutated greater rat warrior in front of him, full of curiosity. What happened? After a long silence, the legal department raised the sign in their hands again. Paradise Guards. Long before the paradise declined, they were the strongest force in the paradise, and also the real capable personal army under Kitten's command in the past. They firmly defended the copyright and safety of the paradise with iron and blood, instead of relying on the current legal department to collect debts after the event. Although they had been lost with the fall of the paradise for many years, their image still remained in the history of the paradise and had never been forgotten. It was just that for some reason, they suddenly appeared at Huaishur's place today. Even the legal department was a little confused. It was hard to understand. Huaishur had not figured it out before he felt his phone vibrating violently. What's going on? What's going on? Why is there suddenly an extra employee? And it's an expatriate guard? Kitten roared on the phone. I don't care. I have to add. Beep. Huaishur hung up the phone without listening to him. He raised his head and looked at the cartoon version of the Greater War rat in front of him. No matter how he looked at it, he could not believe it. Is this for real? So powerful? Come and punch me. Huaishur raised his head and ordered, "Caw." The greater rat tilted its head and looked at Huaishur in confusion, not understanding the meaning of his order. Don't care, just give me a boom. Before its voice died away, a hurricane rushed in. Thunder and lightning suddenly erupted from the room, along with the violent turbulence of air pressure. The strong wind swept countless surgical instruments and flew around in a mess, setting off a series of screams. Then, the roar of a shattering sound belatedly sounded. There was a big hole in the wall of the operating room. After the big hole was another big hole, from the operating room to the infirmary, and from the infirmary to the medicine warehouse next door. Amidst the pile of broken medicine jars, Huaishur raised his hand sluggishly, still maintaining a blocking posture. Unbelievable. His hand was about to break. Huaisher felt as if a truck had hit his face head-on. The destructive force and impact completely exceeded his expectations. With just one hit, Huaisher's bones were fractured. Although Arbiter of Life was not the kind of stigmata that was particularly good at fighting, the war giant rat did not use much strength. It was as if he had done it casually. Huaisher waved his hand. After applying a layer of silver blood medicine, he staggered to his feet and walked back to the operating theater. He circled the giant rat a few times and studied it carefully. It was hard to imagine what kind of strange creature was inside the leather case. Even when he pried open the mouth of the leather cover and looked inside, he could only see darkness. It was as if the experimental subject that had undergone the surgery had disappeared, and the only thing left was a leather case. He had perfectly inherited all the attributes of the experimental body, and even surpassed it. Even if the shape was a little too cartoonish, it did not matter how it looked, as long as it could fight. Unfortunately, once Huaisher let the candle crow out, it would immediately return to its original form and become a limp experimental subject of the Rat Man. The status of the Paradise Guards seemed to only appear when certain conditions were met. It was not only due to the crow's credit, but also not within the scope of Arbiter of Life's destiny. Otherwise, Huaisher would have been able to use this correction value to achieve a huge leap. After careful measurement and inspection, everyone discovered that the greater rat warriors of the Paradise Guardians had not only inherited all the attributes of the experimental subjects, but they also possessed a considerable amount of combat power, were proficient in the use of various weapons, and had excellent adaptability to various environments. They were even experienced in the attack and defense of small teams. This was a direct gift from the Paradise. No matter what Kitten thought, the Paradise itself seemed to be full of affection for Huaisher and was never stingy. This made Huaisher very embarrassed. He began to think, as the Pirate Prince, I have nothing to do. Is it not good to keep an eye on the Paradise? But soon, the slight apologetic feeling was offset by Kitten. With this kind of guy, the revival of the Paradise in the Abyss was just around the corner. There was no need for Huaisher to worry about it. Next, the biggest problem was the official name of the experimental subject. Destruction Warrior. Marvel, who was in charge, suggested New Era Rat Warrior. The alchemist from the biochemistry department suggested Mech Warrior, Rat Bigwood. This was the scholar from the mechanical transmission department who was just chased away. Wouldn't it be more domineering if it's called Red Lotus Naked Rat? The person next to him asked, Asta Rat Cultivator sounds good too. Why can't it be called Rat Cover? Armored Mech Soldier is fine too. I suggest Demon Slayer Rat. I won't accept any rebuttal. Yesiases. Without waiting for Huaisher to react, they had already started to fight in the middle of the argument. The group of scholars and alchemists did not hesitate in the slightest when they were fighting. They swung their wrenches and hammers at each other's faces. Obviously, this was not the first time. Huaisher, who was watching from the side, could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. How could this group of cultured people fight more viciously than the Ascendants? Let's go. We can't afford to provoke them. In the next few days, after a short rest, Huaisher wholeheartedly threw himself into the operating room, picking out seriously injured rat men to upgrade. Unfortunately, only 9 of them could become the Paradise Guards in the end. Because only 9 Aurochs had obtained the Een Spirit's stigmata, only the Aurochs could act as the main controller of the Guardian's consciousness and truly drive these upgraded giant rat men. And the number of Een Spirits that Huaisher had on hand was limited by the Nibelungen ring. Sometimes, Huaisher would even ponder if she should just think of a way to kill Chi-Wen and add a group of guards to him. After all, the old thing was the most useless, and taking up a space did not have any other use except to die, without feeling any heartache. In addition to the 9 Paradise Guards, Sure and Marvel also made more than 30 relatively low-end, enhanced rat men, thanks to the weakening of the number of alchemy arrays. These rat men did not have any other side effects other than being slightly retarded. Sure simply threw them to the Guardians. Anyway, it was easier for them to communicate with each other. In just a few days, the rat men had already learned to shout, "Holy!" These crows' ability to carry goods was so outstanding that it was a little scary. It was said that several students who slept with little 19 would always be awakened by strange sounds in the middle of the night. Then they would see a sleepwalking little cabin in the woods holding a birdcage and singing holy hymns. It was quite scary. Thinking about all kinds of trivial things in his mind, Sure finished dealing with the last seriously injured rat man. The treatment was over for the time being. Then he waved goodbye to Marvel. Next, he planned to have a good rest. He did not plan to work day and night. Once or twice was fine, but if he did it too many times, this thing was really boring and he had to concentrate fully. In just a few days, the skill, Hell Creature Surgery, in the Book of Destiny had risen to level 6. He also obtained an additional skill, Rat Anatomy Expert, which could increase the speed of surgery on rat creatures by 20%. But so what if it was 80% faster? He had not practiced for a few days, and he felt that he had regressed for at least a few years. However, this kind of messy skill was always leveling up. Sighing, Sure brushed her teeth and brushed her teeth. Then she laid down on the bed and prepared to sleep. But in the midst of drowsiness, he suddenly trembled. Stiff, the moment before Sure closed his eyes, he seemed to see a figure standing at the head of the bed. Chandra! The strange figure that he had met once at the station, the member of the exploration team, who had long died. He stood in front of the bed and lowered his head. His wet hair was stuck to his forehead. On his pale face that was swollen from soaking in water, his empty eyes reflected Sure's appearance. He seemed to be smiling. His cracked lips opened and closed silently. Then he seemed to hear a voice coming from afar. He didn't know if it was left or right, east or south, or if it was above his head or below his feet. Sorrowful cries. Sure could only hear the tragic, sorrowful cries. It was as if an ancient memory had been awakened in the soil. Sharp roars rang out and swept over from all directions. The desperate roars and roars of thousands of people gathered into substance, forming a 10,000-foot tide that engulfed him and dragged him into the deepest part of fear. In his dizziness, Sure's fingers twitched. Before he could get up, he had already fallen into the darkness. He was thrown into the coffin of death, covered by layers of cold soil, and sank into the deepest part of hell. There was no way to struggle. In a long trance, Sure seemed to have a strange dream. He dreamed that he had lived a rich and beautiful life. The world was thriving, and all people were closely united. There was no war, no disease, no struggle or persecution. He had no worries about food and clothing, endless wealth, and a long life was peaceful and beautiful. He was happy as if he was living in the highest place of heaven. He had everything. Because of this, everything that was waiting for him was so desperate when he found that everything was beginning to fall into hell. The end had come. In the vague dream, the sun left them, and the night disappeared without a trace. Eternal dusk enveloped everything. Despair came in this long desolation, and the earth cracked. Everything that was once magnificent fell into dust and was crushed into mud. Only the survivors were left wandering in the wilderness like ghosts. God, the Almighty God, those cries of blood whispered, "Why do you make us suffer so much?" No one responded. Maybe God didn't care. So, the prayers gradually became disappointed. In the end, there was no more prayer or luck left. In the deepest darkness, there was only the most painful persistence left. We encompass everything. The voice licked the tears of blood, and the broken soul uttered the last whisper. Then we will recreate everything. After that, endless darkness enveloped everything. Everything cried out. When the alarm clock rang, Weisher opened his eyes from the nightmare and gasped in horror. He was sweating profusely. The despair in the dream still lingered in his limbs, trembling in every nerve ending, wandering in vain. When Weisher raised his hand, he touched the wet stain on his face. It was scarlet tears of blood. The shadow in front of the bed had disappeared without a trace. But there was still a pair of faint footprints on the ground, as if someone had been standing here for a long time, quietly staring at Weisher in the dark. The person who brought him a painful dream turned away before he woke up. Hurried footsteps sounded outside the door, and someone knocked on the door excitedly. When Weisher opened the door, he saw the scholar dancing with joy. The scholar was also stunned when he saw Weisher. He looked confused. How did you get yourself into this state? It's a long story. Weisher grabbed a towel and wiped his face carelessly. He asked what happened. The experimental team just announced the results. The outer structure of the branch control center has been cracked. The scholar was excited. We have found the location of the other 2 branch control centers. We are only one step away from controlling the central tower. Cracked? Weisher was stunned for a moment and suddenly asked, when did the cracking start? For hours, no, 3.5 hours ago. I thought it would be a long battle, but it went unexpectedly smoothly. Mr. Weisher, are you listening? Weisher leaned against the wall and looked down at the time on his phone. He suddenly understood the origin of the nightmare. Chapter 550. It's probably a reflection of events. After learning about what had happened to Weisher, the Grand Master was as calm and indifferent as ever. He didn't even bother to look away. There's no need to make a fuss over nothing. He said, it's a small matter. Weisher's face twitched. Although the Grand Master's depression was frightening and difficult to bear, the Grand Master's normal state was on the other end of the spectrum. He made people feel that he was even less human than when he was abnormal. The former made people feel helpless, while the latter made people feel reverence and fear. It was as if he had truly turned into an inhuman piece of steel, coldly overlooking everything in front of him. There was nothing in this world that could surprise him. Even if an iron crystal exploded in front of him, he wouldn't even frown. Every time Weisher stood next to him, he felt as if he were facing a human-shaped alchemy furnace. He could feel countless alchemy arrays changing within that enormous metal body. Miracles were happening every moment, but he could rarely feel the fluctuations of his emotions. Comparing the two, he couldn't figure out which was the more normal state. In all fairness, he would rather the Grand Master be a bit more lazy. At least that way, he looked a bit healthier. When he thought about it this way, it wasn't surprising that he was so popular after being kicked out by Russell, the purser, the chief engineer, and the others definitely knew the Grand Master's state better than he did. If that was the case, then wasn't he just a spare tire? He instantly felt miserable. But since the Grand Master said it was a small matter, Weisher could finally relax. He continued to ask, what does a reflection of events mean? You're saying that this situation isn't rare? When he thought back to the nightmare he had, he instinctively felt a bit uneasy. At a time like this, it was obviously stupid to be afraid alone. If there were any abnormalities, he should make a prompt decision and report it. Then, everyone should work together to solve the problem. However, Huaishir seemed to be the only one who was very nervous about this. It's too common. The Grand Master replied carelessly, in many cases, origin substances will be imprinted on matter through a certain method, and in the end, the matter recorded in the origin substance can be extracted again through a certain method. There's nothing strange about it. It's like finding a stone slab in a coffin during an archaeological dig. You just happen to understand it. Then why me? Huaishir was puzzled. There has to be a reason, right? Good luck, high spiritual perception, sharp perception, or even contact with related things. There are too many possible reasons. The great Grand Master flipped through the report and raised his head. As far as I know, you're not the only one who experienced hallucinations on the iron crystal during the cracking experiment. There were 6 people in total, besides Ogiest and the communications director. One of them was your student. Huaishir froze in disbelief. The great Grand Master casually pointed to the side. In the direction of the infirmary, Yuan pushed the door open and said goodbye to the medical staff. Her expression was calm, as if she was not affected by anything. When he saw Huaishir conversing with the Grand Master, he didn't go up to disturb them. Instead, he nodded politely and bowed. Then he grabbed Lin Shurjo by the collar and left. Lin 19 was holding a vomit bag in his hand. He vomited so much that his face was pale. He had to rely on Yuan to carry him. He looked like he was on the verge of death. It was unknown what kind of nightmare he had experienced. But after the initial shock, Huaishir quickly understood what was going on. As a ascendant of the path of sin, Lin 19 was 10 times more sensitive to abnormally negative origin substances than other people. He had probably been tormented quite a bit in the illusions reflected by the scenes. How tragic! Huaishir looked at his unlucky student sympathetically. He should give him a few more days off. Just as he was about to continue reporting to the great Grand Master, he saw the steel giant wave his hand disinterestedly. As for what you saw, there's no need to say more. It might not be real. Huaishir didn't understand. Because it's not very useful. It's just a waste of energy, the great Grand Master said. An individual's perspective is narrow and uncertain, while a group's perspective is chaotic and blindly moving. No matter which perspective it is, it will not be able to see the big picture. It will only mislead. He paused for a moment and then said meaningfully, if you become addicted to it. In the worst-case scenario, your entire person might be replaced by the thing that left the mark. Huaishir was shocked. Replaced? Was that really possible? From the records of the origin substance, to come back to life in his body after thousands of years? It's not impossible, but the person who comes back to life might not be that person. The great Grand Master sneered disdainfully. Some people will be brainwashed even when they see minors smoking, let alone empathize with them. Turn around now. Huaishir turned around and looked behind him. Through the thick glass, he saw the huge cube in the laboratory that had changed greatly. It was as if some kind of intricate mechanical creation was slowly opening up. As the cracking experiment progressed, the originally tightly sealed outermost layer had completely opened up. It stretched out in all directions like tree branches, forming a huge structure that was several times larger than its original size. It was expanding. Steel extended and grew from the rotation of the mechanism. The originally huge cube was just a seed. It hadn't grown yet. Behind Huaishir, the great Grand Master's voice came. Tell me, what did you see? A tomb. Huaishir couldn't help but blurt out this unrelated word. What did you feel? Huaishir. After a short period of silence, Huaishir raised his hand and pressed it against his slightly trembling chest. He found it hard to understand this sudden emotion. It was resentment. Just by looking at this thing, an indescribable resentment sprouted from his heart. It was as if this thing was the main culprit that had once caused all the destruction. In reality, it is just a giant energy conversion device that has been shut down, the great Grandmaster said firmly. It does not have the function of a tomb, and there is no reason for people to resent it. Even if it has the miracles of the infernal realm, it is still an inanimate object, a relic that is slightly larger. Huaisheng was stunned. Do you understand? There is no point in dwelling on the afterimages of the past. Since the past is already in the past, there is no need to waste time on these things that cannot be changed. Investing energy in them is just a waste of time. No matter what you see, Huaisheng, their past, their deaths, and their fates have nothing to do with us. The so-called sympathy, resentment, and emotions are just wishful thinking on our part. This is the most important principle to remember in the development of the infernal realm. With the end of the speech, the short break ended here. The great Grandmaster slowly got up and finally said, "You can discuss the rest among yourselves. Do not disturb me before the cracking experiment is over." With the help of the other assistants, he put on the isolation suit again, walked into the inner laboratory, and returned to the huge branch control center. The experiment continued. The so-called branch control center was actually a black box. As a creation of the infernal realm, it was naturally impossible to use the thinking, technical specifications, and even operating methods of the infernal realm for research. Therefore, before it was completely cracked, its internal structure, the principles used, and the technology used to operate it were a mystery to everyone. It was an out-and-out dark box. Because there were no more samples, it was impossible to carry out destructive experiments. If they wanted to figure out its real function and get more clues, they could only continue to carry out various experiments, research through various methods, input different signals, and wait for feedback. In the end, they could figure out the internal operating rules bit by bit. In this process, experience undoubtedly occupied the most important position. In the face of a giant machine that could control the infernal realm, other than the great Grandmaster, no one else had the ability and qualifications to preside over such a complicated project. Therefore, the remaining problems could only be solved by other people in charge. At present, the structure of the outer and middle layer has been explored, but there is still a part of the deeper structure that has not been solved. It may have some functions and conditions that we did not expect, but this is all within the scope of the great Grandmaster's handling. We do not need to worry. It is only a matter of time before it is completely cracked. In the short meeting, after the purser made a report, he distributed the information in his hand. The most important thing now is that when we activated the branch control center, we received some strange signals through it. According to analysis, those signals are likely to be responses from other branch control centers. On the big screen behind him, on the huge map of the Twilight Village, 3 places were quickly highlighted. This was the place where other branch control centers were most likely to exist after the analysis of the scholars. At the same time, we cannot rule out the possibility that the Ivy League also received the signal. The purser reminded, according to the analysis of the Ivy League's performance these days, the possibility of them having a branch control center was quite high. Next, everyone looked at Huaisheng, waiting for him to make a decision. In a short silence, Huaisheng pondered for a moment and asked, "Is there more detailed information?" The terrain, location, and the surrounding situation. At present, there are only some images left when we made the map, but due to the periodic changes of the Twilight Village, the reliability is not high. Area B3, Area D7, and Area E12. The Iron Crystal Constellation's naming of the areas of the Twilight Village was quite simple and crude. Starting from the tower in the center, The ring areas were A, B, C, D, F, and each ring area was roughly divided into 12 parts according to the angle of a circle. It looked simple and crude and easy to understand. But in fact, under the rotation and frequent changes of the ring areas of Inferno, the relationship between each area was a mess. If one wanted to understand it, it was difficult to find the specific location without the help of a computer. The first area that Weischer gave up on was Area B3. There was no other reason. It was too close to the tower. Once they entered Area C, the entire Inferno would become very aggressive. It was simply difficult to explore deeper. If they were not careful, they would die on the spot. As long as they had a little brain, they would not choose to explore now. If the Ivy League was so stubborn, Weischer was very willing to open a bottle of wine to celebrate their courage and wish them a safe return. Area D7's location was excellent in the exploration range of the Iron Crystal constellation. Even a day ago, there was an exploration team outside to conduct a topographic survey of the area. Area E12 was a bit of a pain in the ass. According to the signals sent by the branch and the unmanned outposts all over the Twilight Village as a basis, they carried out a topographic deduction of the current Twilight Village and finally came to a conclusion. It was just right between the Ivory Tower and the Ivy League station. It was even closer to the other side. Why is there no topographic information? Weischer asked curiously. The purser's expression became complicated. Because the place where the signal came from is not the surface. After a short pause, he said, the location of the branch control center is more than 2,000 meters below the surface. What? Weischer's eyes widened. Underground. Yes, that's right. The purser said, according to our exploration, there is a very complicated topographic structure under the Twilight Village. In addition to the huge natural cavern, there are a lot of man-made channels and some complex buildings whose functions are difficult to identify. Until now, there are still a lot of machines operating in it. If the scholars in the analysis room did not guess wrong, then the branch control center of Area D7 is probably a mobile hub that moves around the Twilight Village all year round. Its function is very likely to be related to the rotation of the Twilight Village. Weischer fell into silence. It seemed like he was thinking, but in fact, there was nothing to think about. He was thinking about whether it was possible to take down both of them. If there were no competitors, he could take it slowly, but now that time was too precious. No one knew if the opponent would catch up to him if he fell behind. If possible, he did not want to give the Ivy League even the slightest chance. It would be best if he could suppress the other side and beat them up until they finally recognized the reality. Even if they did not bow down, they would at least run away in a panic. But even if he thought about it a little, he knew it was impossible. Even a rotten ship would have 3 pounds of nails. Moreover, the Ivy League had invested so much this time, it was impossible for them to go back just because of a little setback. They could only fight head-on, with both sides. And this day would come soon. Before this, it was naturally better to be prepared. Now that the number of legions controlled by the Ivy League far exceeded their own, it was obviously not a wise choice to rashly divide their forces. But since it was underground, it gave Weischer a chance. According to other information submitted, the underground environment was generally narrow, and the number of people did not have much meaning. A few elites were often more useful than a large number of cannon fodder. I'll leave the gargoyles and the undead army to you. Without me and the Paradise Guards, can you take down Area D7? Weischer raised his head and asked straightforwardly. The Iron Crystal constellation is not a place that will become useless after losing someone's leadership, Mr. Weischer. The purser smiled reservedly. If this is your order, then we will complete it. You don't have to worry about the rest. Then leave E12's underground to me. Weischer breathed a sigh of relief and finally made up his mind. "Are you confident?" The purser asked, "Do you want to bring the wolfhound?" Next to him, the mosaic wolfhound that represented the great Grandmaster also raised its sign and barked to show its presence. Although it did not look very useful, the purser had once reminded Huaishur, if we were to talk about direct combat ability, the most powerful creature in the Iron Crystal constellation was this mosaic white wolfhound, as one of the Grand Master's proudest creations. Other than its appearance, it really looked exactly like a wolfhound. It was so docile that anyone could touch it. When it was bored, it would carry the sign "Big Brother Play Together" and play frisbee with the students. Huaishur found it hard to imagine that this mosaic actually had the combat ability of a crown wearer. When necessary, it could be even more exaggerated. But the purser would not lie in this kind of place. No need. After thinking about it for a long time, Huaishur finally shook his head. In terms of destructive power, he still had the Lord of the Flies. Now that the Grand Master was in charge of the cracking, he had no time to care about other things. After Huaishur left, if the Iron Crystal constellation made a move, the Wolfhound could at least stay behind to assist and protect the Iron Crystal constellation. Although Huaishur was used to being reckless, he still had to be steady when it was necessary. He could not put all his eggs in one basket. Since he had already made up his mind, there was nothing else to say. After the meeting ended, orders from the highest level began to be issued to every corner of the Iron Crystal constellation. In just 5 minutes, except for the 4 research departments that were the main force cracking the Iron Crystal constellation, the rest were all in a state of war. After a short rest for a few days, the Infernal Exploration Organization from the Research Institute was operating at full efficiency again. Huaishur began to light up the equipment one by one and was ready to set off. A full set of heavy protective clothing like that of an astronaut, a blessed light source that could last for more than 70 hours, tools to deal with various situations, and common exploration equipment. In addition to dealing with the 18 hours of sunlight in the land of dusk during the day, he also had to deal with the darkness underground. Both were terrifying curses that were enough to kill. According to the researchers' calculations, the deeper he went, the stronger the petrification curse in the darkness. Once he lost the light source, Huaishur would probably turn into a stone statue in an instant and be left in the eternal darkness underground forever. The exploration of infernal exploration was no joke. One wrong step could lead to death. After adjusting his mentality, Huaishur put on his helmet and reached out to pick up the white cat on the bookshelf next to him. He rubbed its head. Unfortunately, today is Thursday. Meow. The white cat nimbly jumped out of Huaishur's hand and landed on his shoulder. It squatted down and licked its paws. It was not afraid of the sunlight or the darkness. After all, the cat's appearance was just Russell's bad taste. It was not even a living thing. The thing that existed here was just a projection. The curse could not affect it at all. After inquiring about Little 19's situation, Huaishur gave Yuan a few more instructions before he turned around and walked to the exit at the bottom of the Iron Crystal constellation. There was already a truck waiting for them there. In front of the gate, it was busy. All the park guards had already entered the truck. The staff was installing and adjusting various equipment and loading supplies. After confirming the safety of the truck, they gave a thumbs up to the driver's seat, turned around, and ran to hide in the protective zone. As Huaishur took a deep breath, the heavy gate in front of the truck suddenly opened. The blazing sunlight poured in from the outside like a torrent and instantly swallowed everything. It was as if it was a sign of their bright future. The truck's engine roared as it sped out from the gate and into the depths of infernal hell. There were still 6 hours before sunset, 700 kilometers until the scheduled location. As Raymond gradually revealed a smile, Huaisher discovered an extremely terrifying thing in the helmet. He forgot to bring motion sickness medicine. Chapter 551. In the laboratory, under the huge and strict branch control center, countless steel branches spread out like leaves and branches, covering the sky of the laboratory and dividing the pale light into irregular shapes. Only wisps of sharp light pierced through the opened armature and landed in the air, as if they were swords that could cut the entire world into pieces. Below the budding metal seed, the Grandmaster bathed in the faint light and asked without turning his head, "They're gone." Yes, the purser in the protective suit nodded. As always, his ability to act is outstanding. It really makes us old people feel a little ashamed. But is it really okay to not tell him at all? The Grandmaster was silent. After a long time, for some reason, he suddenly laughed. "There's no point in telling him," the Grandmaster said. "He is too young." So young that it was scary, but at the same time, it was also worrying. 18 years old, an age where one could achieve great things, would be treated with courtesy and respect anywhere. But he should not come to hell. Youth was the most fatal weakness in hell. Just from what the Grandmaster had seen, too many people had been defeated by hell. No matter how amazing the talent and how strong the will was, in the end, they could not bear the burden in the face of tragic reality and the truth. Too much, too much. Rather than telling him and letting him empathize with the sorrow of the destruction, it was better to know nothing from the beginning. The purser could not help but shake his head. "It's rare to see you being so gentle to others." "Am I?" The Grandmaster's smile became mocking, not knowing whether he was mocking others or himself. For people like him, perhaps not telling him anything is crueler. The purser did not answer. "You should leave here," the Grandmaster said. "Everyone retreat to the outer laboratory. Raise the alert level to the highest, and let the wolf dogs in place. Is it necessary? Perhaps." The Grandmaster shrugged slightly and stepped forward, looking up at the huge metal seed in front of him. His eyes behind the shield became blurry. "Who knows?" He whispered softly, reached out, and pulled the last valve. In the roar, blazing electric current fell from the sky, flowing among the countless complicated machines, initiating the final activation. This was one of the facts that the purser had not told Huaisher. With a great Grandmaster taking the lead, a mere deciphering would not stop at the outermost layer at all. They had already penetrated deep into the core, not only the outermost layer's structure, but even the core of the black box was about to be completely exposed in front of everyone. From the subcontrol center of the Twilight Village, the super-large energy conversion device suddenly shook, and the countless armor leaves and pivots on the cube began to tremble crazily. The great Grandmaster raised his hand and took off the protective suit, revealing a grayish-black iron-colored arm. His left hand, which seemed to be made of metal, stretched out with 5 fingers. He pressed it on the giant cube. "Tell it, no, order it. Wake up." A roar erupted at that moment, and countless complicated hubs and components proliferated from the expanding metal hub. It was as if a waterfall had suddenly burst forth and soared into the sky. Dozens of rapidly expanding and growing giant mechanical creations overlapped densely in one place, extending chaotically from the metal seed, tearing apart the innermost layer of the laboratory and protruding outward with irresistible force, until they broke through the thickest armor and completely penetrated out of the room. In the huge shadow cast by the iron crystal, they spasmed crazily like living creatures and suddenly stagnated. The core laboratory had been covered by countless mechanical components that spewed out. The subcontrol center was splitting, disintegrating, and expanding. It was like opening a box in a cartoon, and the messy clothes, passports, underwear, ties, cameras, and cats that were accidentally stuffed inside all sprayed out together. It covered almost every inch of space. Inch by inch, the steel bloomed like flowers, revealing the exquisite ideas and indescribable skills of the past in front of the people who came thousands of years later. And blood. The crazy screeching of the metal came to an abrupt end because a sharper, more disturbing, and trembling wail burst out from the core. Accompanied by the blood, it gushed out. The crimson tide roared, and the high-pitched wail and roar almost became solid, scratching everyone's eardrums, forming an invisible edge, and wildly piercing in all directions. In the wail, countless twisted limbs struggled in the gushing blood, and the broken and twisted figures crawled out, wriggling, but quickly disintegrated, returning to the stinky blood, until the blood covered everything. In the waist-deep crimson, the great Grandmaster pulled the metal beside him, resisting the pull of countless limbs, and stepped forward. Ah, 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 ah. It's so dark here. So dark, something is eating me. It's not my fault, it's not my fault, it's not my fault. Drip, 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 drip. Stop, I beg you, please stop. It was a language that they had never heard before, but at this moment, when it reverberated in their ears, it turned into a real whisper. It penetrated the despair that had passed through millions of years into the skull of each person and soaked into each terrified soul. So annoying. Shut up. The great Grandmaster roared, his voice like thunder. His iron-colored arms swept, and in an instant, the last layer of obstruction was torn apart, completely piercing into the deepest part of the subcontrol center. 5 fingers clenched tightly. At that moment, all the whales disappeared completely. Along with the boiling blood, they quickly evaporated, turning into mist, and quickly thinning, finally disappearing into the air like an illusion. Only bloody palm prints, twisted faces, and crimson marks of broken limbs remained on the ground, the glass, and the ceiling. When the last layer of steel was peeled off, a faint cry spread out. What is that? After the transparent steel, the technical director subconsciously leaned closer to the glass, in disbelief. In the great Grandmaster's hand, it was a small swaddling cloth. In the broken cloth, the fetus made of metal curled up, spasming uneasily, as if it was the first time it came into contact with air, and cried loudly. It was clearly a creation made of countless steel, gears, and reeds, but it was crying like a baby. The great Grandmaster lowered his head and stared at the metal fetus in his hand, whose belly button was still connected to a cable, expressionless. There was no compassion, no fear. He just quietly observed. Its movements gradually stiffened, spasmed, and could not move. Finally, the right eye carved from a gem fell from its eye socket. In the darkness behind the hole, a twisted crystal grew. Why, in the mouth that opened with difficulty, the baby choked and asked a question from thousands of years ago. Sunmaker, why didn't you save me? The voice gradually dissipated, fading along with the wails. Only the sharp crystal quickly pierced out of the body, and drops of black blood flowed out of the wound and fell to the ground. Wait a little longer. The great Grandmaster whispered, Soon, you won't have to suffer any more. Unprecedented gentleness gradually appeared on his cold face. He raised his finger and snapped the baby's neck. Crack! The last sobs dissipated into the air. It was dead. The moment the baby died, the huge subcontrol center quickly flashed with layers of rock color, and then it weathered and shattered, turning into dust. With the collapse of the subcontrol center, the ruins where the oil refinery was once located shook violently, and violent tremors spread in all directions. The ferocious eyes at the top of the central tower seemed to dim a little. Under the great Grandmaster's command, the subcontrol center was completely closed. It was not open, but closed. The energy supply of the Twilight Village was cut off today. The great Grandmaster stared at the collapse in front of him expressionlessly. When the final collapse was over, the last remaining outline appeared in the rapidly dissipating yellow sand. The great Grandmaster was stunned for a moment, which was rare. It was as if it was difficult to understand what was left in front of him. After a long, long time, his expression gradually became complicated. So that's how it is. When the forest hut woke up from the nightmare again, he did not know how much time had passed. He struggled to get up from the bed with a splitting headache and could not remember what had happened. He only remembered that after waking up, he cried as if he was 5 years old. He curled up in bed and could not speak. Someone beat him violently, pulled him up, and sent him to the infirmary. The doctor prescribed him medicine, perhaps hypnosis, and some psychological treatment. Then he took the medicine and drank water and returned to the room in a daze. When he opened his eyes again, he finally regained consciousness. "You look a little better." At the door of the room, Yuan, who was reading a book on the sofa, raised her eyes with a solemn expression. "You were terrible just now. I almost thought you were going to die." "Fortunately, I'm still alive." Lin Shurjo raised his head bitterly and rubbed his chin. "It's just a little pain in my neck. Is this the side effect of the medicine?" "At that time, you bit everyone you saw like a madman. When you rushed at me, I didn't stop." Yuan answered truthfully. "In fact, I accidentally broke your neck at that time, and it was reconnected later. You should be careful when you move." "What the hell?" Lin Shurjo exclaimed and touched his neck subconsciously. "It's just a joke." "No." Yuan shrugged. "I just wanted to make it easier for you." Lin Shurjo was speechless. He could not stand Yuan's joke because he did not know whether it was true or not. After a long silence, Lin Shurjo suddenly remembered, "Where is the teacher? Where did he go?" "He left about 6 hours ago. Before he left, he came to see you. You were sleeping soundly at that time, so he did not wake. You can't go." The sharp voice in the forest interrupted Yuan's words, and she froze in place. "No, I have to find him. I have to do it immediately." Lin Shurjo was overwhelmed by sudden fear. "Don't go. Don't go. He can't go there." There, he recalled the scene in the nightmare, and froze in place. "There is death everywhere." It was as if darkness had returned. In the suffocating drowsiness, he waited alone among the bones and blood. As if hearing his breathing in the midst of death, pairs of lifeless eyes looked back. "Please save me," a hoarse whisper sounded in his ears again. In the blood that was about to drown him, countless hands grabbed his legs, wailed, screamed, and prayed to him, "Please stay." At that moment, the forest hut finally realized the nature of hell. He understood the hell that only appeared in his great-grandfather's nightmares. He staggered back and fell on the bed, murmuring hoarsely, "This place is hopeless." Chapter 552. Under the scorching sun. The huge truck sped forward between the broken roads, stirring up layers of dust. After the initial discomfort, Huaishur had barely adapted to the current speed. At least if he didn't run around randomly, this speed was still manageable. Although it was still too fast, it wasn't to the point where his life was hanging by a thread all the time. After he relaxed, he finally had the mood to look at the scenery outside the window. As the module rotated, they left the desert and entered the area of a huge city in the yellow sand. Countless layers of factories had stopped operating, and only clusters of shrubs were growing out of the ruins. The atmosphere of decadence hit him in the face. But there was also a shocking sense of beauty. It was hard to describe, but Huaishur suddenly understood the ruin lovers of the present realm. It was as if the whole world had abandoned him, but at the same time, there was a reassuring silence that made him gradually relax and feel a sense of tranquility. although this silence and tranquility itself was abnormal enough. Through the helmet, he sighed softly in the radio. Although it's called hell, it looks similar to an ordinary wilderness. Ordinary wilderness? Raymond felt that there was something wrong with his ears. There aren't so many ruins in the ordinary wilderness, right? There are some places, and there are some. Huaishir was silent for a long time. The village gradually covered in yellow sand appeared in front of his eyes again, and countless silent and empty faces. He shook his head hard and dispelled the memories in the records. Is the present realm so chaotic now, or is it just your wild ways? Raymond thought for a long time and finally reacted. I forgot that you were an inspector. You must have seen a lot of messy things. By the way, I have a question that I haven't asked, but I'm very curious. How are the benefits of an inspector? I heard that in addition to internal benefits and a lot of special discounts, there are paid vacations every year. There are, but most of the paid vacations don't have a chance to use them. Huaishir shook his head. Thinking about his life over the past year, he couldn't help but sigh. It's because I basically have nothing to do at home every day. Other than playing games, I can only draw cards from mobile games. I'm so lazy. Occasionally, when I go out, a bunch of people will think of ways to give me dirty money, wanting to drag me down with them. To be honest, it was too annoying. He felt that after a long time, he would lose his dreams and become an abominable member of society. Otherwise, I wouldn't have come to the ivory tower. Raymond almost stepped on the gas pedal and was dumbfounded. Are you serious? Of course it's fake. What do you think? Huaishir rolled his eyes. How could there be such a good thing in the world? If it was really that peaceful, how do you think I reached the third stage in half a year? When you stay at home, there are people who want to persecute you every day. When you go out, there are even heartless superiors who treat you like livestock and make you work for them. Even when you went out to apply for a job, you would accidentally turn into a cult base, and when you went out to travel, you would be robbed halfway by the fine night society. Even so, there are still people who treat you as a homicidal maniac. Who would want to live such a miserable life? Hiss, Raymond sucked in a breath of cold air. How did you survive until now? Probably it's because I'm lucky. Suddenly, Raymond looked at Huaishir with a complicated gaze. It was as if he was looking at a Paralympic athlete, full of admiration and pity, and there was even a faint hint of encouragement. Don't slack off, young man. Keep up the good work. He had no idea what was going on with this guy's brain. During the long journey, the two of them chatted here and there, but they didn't feel bored or nervous. Raymond was a professional and experienced driver and had long been used to this kind of messy situation. Huaishir, on the other hand, simply felt that it was quite cool here, and his mood was relaxed and happy. It seemed that the strengthened version of young arbiter of life's adaptability to hell had also been greatly improved. As Huaishir's large group gradually took shape, the repulsive feeling and pressure from hell decreased a lot. The difference was like an outsider who had just arrived, and an outsider who had lived here for 2 or 3 years. It wasn't big, but it wasn't small either. The curse was still a threat to him. Even with a full set of protection and a helmet under the sun outside the window, he could still feel his skin dry and painful. Sometimes, when he moved his mouth, the dry skin on his face would crack. Although it would recover quickly, it was especially uncomfortable. Even if Huaishir switched the biosphere in his body to desert mode, it still didn't have much effect. But at least after drinking a few bottles of beer, the cracking phenomenon slowed down a lot. How far is it? After this ring, we'll reach the nearest underground entrance about 70 kilometers ahead. If we go down, it'll take about 3 to 4 hours, and we might take a long detour. Because we don't know the situation underground, we can only act according to the situation. Raymond glanced at the navigation screen under the white cats, and scratched the cat. Then, the white cat gave him a fierce claw. His gloves were almost cut open. At this time, they had already passed through the layers of factories and went deep into the dead silent city that was so monotonous that it seemed to be copied and pasted. Between the messy viaducts, countless grayish-white skyscrapers stood on the ground like a dense forest. There were no windows, and they couldn't even see the entrance. It seemed to be purely made of some kind of solid rock blocks similar to concrete, which made people think of tombstones and other unpleasant things. And between the countless tall buildings, some of the land had completely collapsed, revealing the slowly operating giant mechanical structures below. Bursts of black smoke would occasionally spurt out from it, bursting out with sharp sounds. They had gradually gone deep into the Twilight Village. According to Weischer's estimation, the specific area of the entire Twilight Village was about the size of Cheongjo, maybe even smaller. Because the data was too detailed, it couldn't be calculated. Among the many types of hell, the Twilight Village belonged to the most hidden, submerged type. At the edge of the sandstorm, the snowfall without warning, the rainstorm, and the storm, the further outside they went, the thinner they saw. In the end, the whole person would disappear in the superimposed state of hell, and the outer layer of the abyss never to return. Unless they were some special border relics or had special stigmata, most explorers wouldn't try to get close to the edge. Weischer and the others all relied on the station built in advance by the Iron Crystal Seat to enter this place. But even the station wasn't absolutely safe. There were still miserable colleagues like Kandra, who had been assimilated wandering there, unable to be free. Just as Weischer thought of this, in the corner of his eyes, under the collapsed building, a figure seemed to appear without warning. Then, when he took a closer look, it disappeared again. In his vague memory, the swollen outline seemed to look to this side, then raised a hand and pointed in the direction they were going, warm and considerate, looking forward, longing, and expecting. Step by step, it led them to eternal damnation. Weischer's movement stiffened, and he subconsciously pulled out his sword. Just now, he said bitterly, I think I saw the colleague who disappeared on the Iron Crystal Seat. He didn't directly mention Kandra's name, but chose this nickname that everyone understood. Raymond's expression also became strange. No, it should be said that the frivolous smile on his face disappeared for a moment, and he fell silent. He was expressionless. What a coincidence. I also saw a former colleague on the radar. He narrowed his eyes and looked up into the distance outside the window. It's just that he's not on the Iron Crystal Seat. Weischer frowned. Before he could react, he heard an ear-piercing alarm in the cockpit. Lock on the alarm. All of a sudden, Raymond stepped on the gas pedal and leaped down from Dugga. He roared in midair. Hey, hey, hey. The Eye of Nightmare is here. Be careful. Boom. A violent explosion erupted from where they were originally heading. A landing capsule the size of a freezer fell from the sky and smashed into the place where they were supposed to be. Then the outer armor exploded, and the flames residing in it spewed out and flew into the sky. In the sky, as the optical invisibility frame was removed, a ferocious outline slowly appeared. A huge aircraft engraved with the Eye of Nightmare's emblem appeared in midair. Even though it wasn't a huge object like the airship that covered the sky, it still cast a ferocious shadow on the ground. Under the urging of two huge propellers, the giant helicopter-like aircraft quickly lowered its altitude and followed closely behind Weischer and the others. If the fuselage was equipped with some missiles that could be used in hell, it would have fired all the missiles and burned Weischer and the others to ashes. But now, there was still a threat that wasn't inferior to missiles chasing after them. In the landing capsule, 6 flames soared into the sky and chased after them like fireballs. The truck landed with a loud bang and crashed through a wall without any damage. It sped up in a sorry state. Weisher was almost pressed into the chair, unable to move. He began to rejoice that he had just discovered a vomit bag under his helmet. F***CK, it's Salamander. Raymond cursed angrily and turned the steering wheel, trying to turn and shake off the flames that were chasing after them. However, the flames floating in the air were like living creatures, biting onto them tightly. They refused to let go. Is that a large group of hell? Weisher raised his eyes and looked at the rearview mirror. Yes, the large group of hell that has a contract with the Eye of Nightmare are all half-elemental, half-biological flame spirits. They're not afraid of the curse in the sunlight at all. Boom! Before Raymond could finish his sentence, a loud bang burst out. The truck suddenly shook and was almost overturned by the flame that had crashed into it. The flame stopped in the air for a moment and was about to crash again. But immediately after, the sunken carriage was suddenly torn apart, and a large hand covered in metal armor reached out from it. Under the sunlight, the hand grabbed the ball of flame spirit essence out of thin air. It even rubbed it twice. "Little brother, what's wrong with you?" Salamander's flames twisted, and finally a burning figure appeared. He struggled to pull out his sword and slashed at the large hand. Then the hand lifted Salamander's body and pressed him against the wall beside him. Friction, friction, friction. Ear-piercing screams burst out from the flames. Soon, they disappeared without a trace. There were no more flames. However, in this gap, the other 5 flames suddenly changed directions and crashed into the wheels under the carriage. It was as if they wanted to perish together with them. The carriage shook, and then it split open out of thin air. It fell off, revealing the chairs that were welded to the chassis of the carriage, as well as the 9 burly figures on the chairs that looked like giants. In their thick protective suits, the park guards pulled out the shotguns that were uniformly equipped at their waists. They pulled the bolt and aimed at the flames that were pouncing on them. Wholly accompanied by a devout chant, they pulled the trigger. Chapter 5:53. The roar rose from the chanting. After the armor and the carriage fell off, the intertwining iron rain splashed in all directions, leaving exaggerated spreading tracks in the air. The weapon, which looked as heavy as a shotgun, used a completely different mechanism inside. After getting rid of the gunpowder reaction, a crude alchemy reaction chamber was set up inside the barrel of the gun. It destroyed the small miracles in the most violent way, melting lead and iron, intensifying silver, and then naturally producing such a cone-shaped metal rainstorm in hell. Within a 15-meter shooting range, the silver rainstorm, which was a mixture of lead and iron steam, would bring about a terrifying lethality that was not inferior to any weapon. Although there were shortcomings such as the difficulty of loading and the low cost-performance ratio, everything was no longer a problem with the production and supply of iron crystal seats. Now, as the shining silver rain splashed out, the 3 flames that bore the brunt of it were instantly torn into pieces. In the burst of flames, there seemed to be some shriveled corpse falling, but as the truck sped forward, it quickly disappeared. The roar of a helicopter came from the sky. The huge aircraft suddenly accelerated and took advantage of the fact that there was no way to change lanes on a side road to run directly in front of them. The huge body nimbly changed direction and flew backward, slowly lowering its altitude. From a distance of dozens of meters, Weisher could almost see the Iron Knight shrouded in armor next to the pilot in the lowered cockpit. Behind the narrow gap of the helmet's eyes, there was no fluctuation in the pair of red eyes. They were looking in their direction, You guys are F*** King lingering around. Didn't you just get a little more pension? Do you have to F***King do this? Raymond cursed angrily and reached out to pull the joystick next to him. He raised his hand and flipped the switch on the dashboard at the top of the cockpit. The engine roared, accompanied by gusts of hot air spurting out from the chassis of the truck. The entire huge truck seemed to have shrunk a little, becoming a little smaller and more agile. It seemed to have seen that they wanted to escape. Under the huge body of the aircraft, several landing pods were thrown out again, and more than a dozen salamander flames rose from them again. The flames and the large groups chasing behind the vehicle echoed each other, using strange screams as communication, blocking the direction in which they dodged in the air. They were not in a hurry to attack. Instead, they wanted to constantly harass and create trouble for them. Huaishir pulled out Lord of the Fly and pointed it forward, wondering if he should give these bastards a good beating. However, there were only 4 bullets left in the judgment mode. He did not want to move unless it was absolutely necessary. He switched the magazine to its physical state and loaded the thumb-sized bullets into it. A total of 6 shots. Beelzebub moaned in pleasure. Just as it was about to say something terrible like, "It's full," Huaishir closed the magazine and rolled down the window. He did not give Beelzebub a chance to trash talk and stuck his head out the window. Ignoring the messy flames flying around, Beelzebub aimed at the helicopter in the distance and pulled the trigger repeatedly. A shocking explosion erupted. The recoil of the Lord of the Flies in live-fire mode was shockingly strong. It was as if a wild horse was struggling madly. Even with Huaishir's grip, the gun almost flew out of his hand. The thumb-sized alloy bullet instantly turned red under the activation of the matrix. It pierced through the air, leaving a pale white trail, and flew towards the aircraft. The terrifying kinetic energy that was not inferior to a large-caliber sniper rifle gave it the power to penetrate armor. It trampled on the insignificant steel in front of it. After tearing the window in front of the cockpit, it instantly arrived in front of the pilot. The moment Huaishir pulled the trigger, the armored man in the co-pilot seat suddenly pulled out his sword. The heavy sword blocked the bullet's path. The collision between steel and steel created a loud noise. The seat that the armored man was sitting on actually twisted and broke from the base. The heavy sword screamed in the vibration. A faint dent appeared on the sword. A deformed bullet core fell from the sword and landed on the back of the pilot's hand, making a sizzling sound. There was no need for orders at all. Enduring the intense burning pain, the pilot who escaped with his life pressed the red button and activated the deflection field on the fuselage. He threw down 2 black containers and quickly rose to the altitude. Then, with Huaishir's gunshots, the pilot began to see the number of the fuel gauge drop. The force field conversion engine roared, unable to bear the heavy load. The verification chip was almost overloaded under the impact in this short period of time. It was as if it had been bombarded by a cannon at close range. After firing 6 bullets, Huaishir felt that his wrist was about to break. Just as he was about to turn around and kill the dozen or so salamanders who were circling around, he realized that the balls of fire were like rabbits who saw a dog. They all began to jump left and right crazily on the spot. They were frightened by Beelzebub. When they saw Huaishir's gun aimed at them, they frantically made tactical maneuvers and hid even further away than a kitten that was being chased. But before they could get rid of these guys, the 2 containers thrown by the aircraft had already smashed into the front of the truck. Raymond drifted on the spot and almost threw Huaishir off. Then, as the containers were smashed, 2 roaring motorcycles flew out from them, carrying armored knights and speeding towards them. With the roar of the engine, flames even spewed out from the tail of the oversized motorcycles. In an instant, They nimbly swept past the guard's scattershot and got close to the wheels as if they were juggling. The spears in their hands pierced out. The sound of tires exploding could be heard, and Raymond's expression became more and more unpleasant. Fortunately, there were enough tires on the truck for them to poke more than a dozen times. But the problem was that the other party did not even need to finish poking. Once they slowed down, the Eye of Nightmare would definitely chase after them. Once they were anchored here, there was no need to think about the subcontrol center underground. It was almost equivalent to giving it to them for free. He was simply too familiar with this. Once the detection team that was searching around found traces of the enemy, they would not let go and call for reinforcements. Then more than a dozen teams would begin to surround them, or there was no need to waste so much manpower and directly call for artillery support. At that time, they might die even more miserably. Weisher was dumbfounded. He originally thought that driving a truck in hell was already the best. In the end, the other side had planes, cannons, and even F*King motorcycles. Why are they so advanced? F*CK. Otherwise, the Eye of Nightmare is the top mercenary group in the cemetery of the returnless. They are so close to more than a dozen hells that they wear the same pants. It's just a few motorcycles. They even have relics of authority. It's just that the team from the Twilight Village that came this time might not have such a high-level configuration. Weisher was stunned. Before he could take a few breaths of cold air, he reacted, "Wait, how do you know so much?" "Ha ha ha, that's a long story." Raymond smiled awkwardly and turned the steering wheel. Suddenly, he swung his tail on the spot. The body of the car was like an iron wall that sent an approaching motorcycle flying, exploding into a ball of fireworks in midair. However, taking advantage of the slight pause, Salamander and another motorcycle that was wandering around suddenly approached. Weisher was completely furious. After being out for half a day, he did not see his destination. Instead, he saw a group of people rushing up to collect tolls and pestering him. Since he could not continue on his way, he could only F*King send them on their way. He suddenly pushed open the car door, ignoring Raymond's exclamation, and jumped out. "Hey, what are you doing?" "Practicing the piano." In the air, within the bulky protective suit, Weisher waved her hand, and a chain emitting black smoke and sparks flew out from her hand. It wrapped itself around the handlebars of the motorcycle from a distance of several dozen meters and rapidly contracted. "Hello." With an exaggerated spin, Weisher, who had jumped out of the passenger seat, fell from the sky. He brushed past the flames and fell, stepping on the front of the motorcycle. Before he could steady himself, the rider on the motorcycle had already thrown away his spear, pulled out a pistol from the weapon rack, and aimed it at Weisher's face. "Drummer!" With a sudden burst of wind, the barrel of the gun was grabbed, raised, and aimed at the sky. The bullet flew out. The rider was stunned. Before he could react, he saw a shadow flying past in front of him. The figure shrouded in the protective suit seemed to have grown 8 arms in an instant. Holding the sacrificial knife and the sword of virtue, Weisher swung his arms, pulled the light on the blade, and slashed forward madly, completing the intense rhythm in an instant. But it was impossible to tell how many slashes he made. In the shadow cast by Weisher, the rider was stunned. He lowered his head and only saw the crisscrossing cracks on his protective armor. He was stunned. "Goodbye." Weisher waved his hand, fell backward, grabbed the shrinking chain, and returned to the motorcycle. Then the tyrannical sunlight sprinkled down. The curse came. Thick black smoke rose from the broken armor, and the screams came to an abrupt end. Flames rose and wrapped around the burning wreckage. The motorcycle tilted and rolled on the ground, ushering in a destructive explosion. But then the roar of more motorcycles sounded from the front corner, and the low sound of propellers echoed in the sky. As if enraged, a large number of airdrop cabins were thrown down, and then dozens of flames rose from the back of the motorcycles. Weischer was dumbfounded. He couldn't win in terms of numbers. How far is it? He landed on the roof of the truck and asked through the radio. 3 kilometers. It's a matter of stepping on the accelerator. Raymond shouted loudly, "I'm going to use my power. Hold on tight." What the hell? Weischer thought he didn't hear clearly, but then he felt the entire truck suddenly turn around and drive straight toward the collapsed building next to them. It was going to be a race. Weischer's face turned pale, thinking of the wild experience of crossing mountains and seas a few days ago. He felt his scalp tingle and immediately tied himself to the front of the truck. The remaining guards naturally grabbed the chairs they welded to the truck one by one, ready to accept the impact. Their vision blurred. They didn't feel the shock and roar of the impact. Weischer only felt his body lighten, and then he fell backward. When he came to his senses, he saw the ground quickly moving away from him. He was rising. The entire truck had strangely driven up the building. Literally, it drove up the building. Ignoring gravity, the wheels of the truck crushed Newton's coffin lid, maintaining a 90-degree angle with the ground. It drove on the building and quickly rose up. Weischer hung on the rope of sorrow, stunned. But in this rapid rise, he heard the sound of propellers getting closer and closer. When Weischer looked up, he saw the same dull face in the cockpit of the rapidly approaching aircraft. Unbelievable. Is there such a thing? Yes, there is such a thing. Without thinking, ignoring the flames that were chasing him, Weischer raised his hand, clenched the spear of compassion, and threw the brilliant iron light at the aircraft close at hand. With a whistling sound, the deflecting force field was torn apart by the blade of the spear. Then it penetrated the steel, not toward the cockpit, but toward the right wing of the aircraft. The armored man who pulled out his sword again was stunned at first, but he immediately reacted and shouted at the pilot, "Make an emergency landing." Amid the violent tremors, a loud explosion was heard. With an all-out attack, the spear of compassion had penetrated the wing of the aircraft. The body of the spear was stuck between the blades of the propellers, colliding with the rapidly rotating steel, accompanied by a scalp-numbing high-pitched sound. The huge fan blades fell apart, and the heavy and sharp fragments whistled past Weischer, deeply embedded in the building. With the left wing broken, thick smoke and flames spewed out, and the aircraft fell crookedly in the air, spiraling downward and finally smashing into the ground. In the burning wreckage, the armored sublimator walked out of the thick smoke, dragging a heavy longsword. He raised his head and looked at the truck with wings nimbly jumping between floors and escaping. After a long time, he retracted his gaze and pulled out a radio walkie-talkie from the wreckage behind him. "Target confirmed," he said. "Weischer from the Ivory Tower and the defector, Leonard the Immortal, are heading toward you. Treat them well." "Roger." In the noisy sound of the electric current, there was a hoarse response. Chapter 554. The crazy ride that was so fantastical that it made people doubt their lives finally came to an end. Weischer had been hanging in the wind for 20 minutes. This truck, which had crushed Newton's coffin and ruined classical physics, seemed to be able to drive on any flat surface. Other than the fact that it couldn't ride on air, it had ridden on everything else. In the middle of the ride, it even did a weird Thomas circle on a tall tower and stood on one leg. The style of the scene was extremely strange. According to Raymond, the interior of this truck used the most advanced laws of quantum mechanics. As long as the horsepower was increased the moment it touched the building, the angle between the body and the building was formed. With enough thrust, It could use the principles of quantum mechanics and gravity to achieve the effect of climbing the building perpendicular to the ground. As long as it maintained enough speed, it could continue to drive. Why sure would be a King idiot if he believed it. Although he didn't read much, he couldn't scare people like this. As the navigation system moved forward, a huge crater appeared between the abandoned high-rise buildings without warning. It was a standard square with a width of about 100 meters. It was extremely accurate. Looking down from above, one could see the steel that made up the four walls. One could also vaguely see the machinery slowly moving behind the gaps in the steel. In the deepest part of the darkness, nothing could be seen. It was impossible to see how deep the pit was. The truck continued to move forward as if it didn't see the deep pit in front of it. Weisher didn't panic at all. Even if Raymond told him that this truck could drive in the air through some T mechanics, he wouldn't be surprised. But what happened next shocked him. When the truck drove to the edge of the deep pit, it was as if the entire truck had turned into a mollusk in an instant. When the wheels crossed the edge and stuck to the edge of the iron wall, the front half of the entire truck suddenly bent 90 degrees and then went down without any stagnation. Weisher watched the bend move from the front of the truck to the parking space. Finally, the entire truck completely disappeared as it hung on the iron wall. What the hell happened? Why did the style change in an instant? Don't ask, it's quantum mechanics. When Weisher returned to the cockpit, he heard Raymond's explanation. He raised his hand and pressed another row of buttons. He turned on the headlights in front of the car and unceremoniously turned on the high beam in hell. Under the illuminated headlights, the delicate crystals emitted a dazzling light. Among them, the blessed ointment began to burn. It dispelled the darkness that was as thick as a living thing. However, he was still unable to stop the chill that gradually seeped into his bones. It was so cold that he felt his entire body stiffen. According to our current reserves, the ointment can last for a total of 26 hours. Let's hope we can find the location of the branch control center in 26 hours. Raymond said, "Doesn't that mean it's the long grass stage again? It wasn't easy for me to move around, but after a few hits, I feel like I'm done for if I'm not careful. If you're talking about the enemy, don't worry. There won't be any less." Raymond's jaw moved nimbly as he manipulated the internal lighter to light a cigarette for himself. The entire helmet was immediately shrouded in smoke. The Eye of Nightmare is like a wild dog that has seen the smell of blood. Once it meets its target, it will chase after it closely and will never let go easily. You and your guards will be busy from now on. Weisher shrugged indifferently. Then let's fight. There's no tier 4 anyway, so there's no need to worry about not being able to beat them. Why don't you introduce me to your former colleagues? Judging from the style, it should be a branch of the Hand of Paleness this time. Raymond scratched his head. He said, "Let me think. The captain should be an old acquaintance, Avery. However, he's already tier 4, so he probably won't make a move. The other 4 company commanders are Oliver from Ironwall, Gaines from Experience, and Angelo from Barbarian. The one we saw just now is Samson from Bloodkiss. They've all been tier 3 for more than 10 years. Because of an accident, they couldn't advance to tier 4, but they've basically completed the soul fusion. Remember not to be careless." Division? Weisher was surprised. "That's all. I thought that was all." Raymond immediately rolled his eyes. If all the Eye of Nightmare were to fight, not to mention whether the Ivy League would go bankrupt or not, the Ivory Tower would definitely play the flute and gather all the white doves, red deer, and gray storks to reorganize the school guards. That exaggerated. What else? Raymond asked. A complete Eye of Nightmare can participate in the Pedigree War. Moreover, they have an employment agreement with their natural enemy, Tyr. Are you going to fight with your head At that time, the Grandmaster might even have the geographical advantage and resources to barely defend against a few waves. Those of us who dare to show our faces will definitely be crushed to death. In short, be careful. Don't be reckless. The Eye of Nightmare is very fierce. I know you're also very fierce, but be careful not to capsize. I understand. Weisher wanted to scratch his head. He understood what Raymond meant. As one of the most professional wild dogs of war in hell, even if the level of everyone in the Eye of Nightmare was not too ridiculous, their combat ability was strong enough, and it was proven through countless battles. They could not be treated as most of the salted fish in the present realm who lived like princes. On the contrary, everyone in the Eye of Nightmare was a desperado. So, what's going on between you and them? Weisher asked, why did your former colleagues draw their swords and slash people without even saying hello when they met? Could it be that there's a rule in the Eye of Nightmare that you can enter but not leave? Although it's troublesome to enter and leave, it's not that bad. Moreover, many people retire every year. Some can't fight anymore, some are tired, and some are simply on the verge of death. They take their pension and leave. Which kind are you? I'm the kind that's about to die. Raymond replied nonchalantly. At that time, we fought a tough battle. Everyone in the team died, and I was about to die, so I simply didn't want to work anymore. In the end, they gave me too little pension. I had no choice. Let me guess. Weisher raised his eyebrows. You took it yourself? How could I? Raymond waved his hand and smiled shyly. Before I blew up the door, I at least asked for their advice, even though it was useless. And then I snatched a lot. At that time, I thought that since I was going to die anyway, I might as well do it. In the end, I didn't expect that I wouldn't die. What a pity. Do you regret it? Yeah, if I had known that I wouldn't die, I would have snatched more. At this point, Raymond patted his knee bitterly. You didn't see it, but there are really a lot of good things in their treasury. Yes. You can't wait to take all of them away, right? You didn't bring enough bags. Weisher had too many opinions on this topic. He empathized with him. I used to be like this when I was doing the same thing. Sigh, I was still too young at that time. I forgot that I was a member of the Astronomy Association. Otherwise, I would have openly gone to confiscate them. Raymond looked at Weisher in shock and felt that something was wrong. It was bad enough that he was doing the same thing, but it was a pity that he didn't confiscate all of them. He thought that he was already crazy enough, but he didn't expect that the most ruthless and evil people were actually in the Astronomy Association. Are you still human? What's wrong? Weisher looked over in shock. Raymond looked away, awkwardly. Well, just now I was joking. What a coincidence, me too. Weisher's expression was very calm. What you heard about doing the same thing and confiscating are all lies. As everyone knows, I'm an inspector of the Astronomy Association. I won't do anything like sending out black letters. Is that so? Yes. Weisher nodded vigorously. Where were we just now? Eye of Nightmare. Yes. Weisher coughed dryly and asked, what did you do when you were there? Was it also transportation? More or less, although the car I drove was different from the one I'm driving now. In the Eye of Nightmare, everyone didn't have a surname. Sometimes they would add a nickname in front of it to distinguish them. At that time, because I was too reckless, others called me Leonard the Undead. Weisher felt that something was wrong. Was there a difference between the two characters? Raymond shrugged. You have to have a fake name when you're out there, right? But your fake name is too casual, isn't it? There's only one word missing. It doesn't matter because this name is also fake. Weisher's expression suddenly twitched. "What's your original name?" "I forgot." Raymond shrugged and didn't care. Only this sentence wasn't a lie. Unlike other large organizations, the graveyard of the returnless never appeared in the present realm. This was because this loose alliance was formed by countless desperados who were addicted to hell. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been rejected and resisted in the present realm because of its excessive connection with the elements of destruction. It was more like a talent market and trading platform formed by countless large and small organizations. It was very simple to become a member. One just had to find one of their agencies at the remote border, submit an application, and then swear that they would never live in the present realm or the border for a long time and would spend the rest of their lives in hell. That was it. As an alliance formed by the earliest pioneers of hell, this group of explorers who were tempted by hell resolutely left the present realm behind and tirelessly sought the mysteries of the abyss, thus forming the current rules. This was an oath, and at the same time, a curse. After that, the person who made the oath would abandon his original name and officially become a returnless, an explorer who had nothing to do with the present realm. This was the meaning of the graveyard of the returnless. Once you joined, your original name would die in the eyes of the law, and even many disputes and troubles would be settled for you one by one. But from then on, everything in the present realm had nothing to do with you. According to the oath, members would not be able to stay in the present realm for more than a month, nor could they live in any border for a long time. Most of the rest of their lives would be devoted to the endless hell. Although there was now a trend of abuse of border relics and becoming a criminal trust group, the graveyard of the returnless principle of absolutely not interfering with the present realm remained unchanged. At this point, Huaishur was tactful and didn't continue to ask more questions. As the two chatted casually, they were now deep underground, and the depth gauge showed that they had reached a depth of about 2,200 meters. And here, the originally endless deep pit with many differences ended here, and was replaced by an underground hole so huge that the edge couldn't be seen at all. Under the support of countless circular pillars like buildings, the huge underground space extended to the end of the darkness. A whistling wind blew from afar. After the truck made a 90-degree turn, it arrived at the roof of this place. Countless giant gears and levers could be seen rotating below. Countless complicated machines were quietly operating here, accompanied by countless low and ear-piercing noises, forming a deep echo like the tides of the sea. Compared to them, Huaishur felt that this truck was like a small insect, a bug that accidentally got into a huge machine. This is a bit difficult. He scratched his head. He sighed, because he felt the sudden crisis of death. Chapter 555. Amidst the noise, a mournful voice suddenly sounded. It sounded like countless pieces of iron scraping against the glass, and the weird sound that made one's teeth ache was rapidly approaching. In the rear compartment, the park guards in the armor raised the lantern in their hands and shone it at the weird sound that was rapidly approaching behind them. They saw dozens of pairs of scarlet eyes shining ferociously in the darkness. Countless pieces of iron pieced together to form a huge, weird face. It was impossible to tell whether it was a human or a beast. Among the messy organs, there were more than a dozen huge blood-red crystals inlaid, without any pattern. They were like eyes that were shining, revealing a crazy light that was almost condensed into a substance from them. In the roar, countless slender knife legs were beating the steel ceiling with all their might. The huge body that was crazily extending from the darkness seemed to have no end. It was entangled together, making one's scalp tingle. It was a huge steel centipede that was as big as a train. It was hard to imagine why such a monster was made of steel that looked like a living creature, or why it evolved into such a mechanical creation. As countless sawtooth-covered mouthparts opened, It burst out a cry like a baby crying. It screamed. It was just a scream, but it set off layers of air waves that rolled in the direction of the truck. Raymond's face turned green with fright. He stepped on the accelerator and turned the steering wheel fiercely, narrowly brushing past the edge of the straight sound wave. He saw that the rear of the truck was silently missing, leaving only iron dust flying up and rustling down in the darkness. F***CK. Redmond was dumbfounded. He looked at Weischer and asked, "Can we fight this?" "Fight your ass. Run." Weischer was dumbfounded. How to fight this kind of supergiant monster that could shoot cannons when it opened its mouth? He didn't even know how to release a wave. Was he going to rush up and scratch it? As the giant centipede moved its head, the straight sound wave drew an arc in the air and chased after the rear of the truck. A hurricane swept across. The truck dodged between the huge pillars in a sorry state, but then a continuous buzzing sound was heard, as if a taut wire was broken. On the front of the car, several ghastly scratches silently appeared. When the front of the car turned around again, with the help of the light, they could see that there were countless iron wires in this space, like a net, enveloping the entire area. That scared me to death. I thought it was a tripwire mine. Raymond wiped off his cold sweat, but Weischer felt a chill at the back of his head. He swallowed his saliva and said, "Don't be so quick to relax. It could be worse." Then, under the illumination of the high-beam lights, a huge gray iron-colored mechanical spider quietly emerged from the countless nets, casting a ferocious shadow. Stinky liquid filled with the smell of rust continuously dripped out from the huge, empty abdominal sac. There was a tiger in front and a wolf behind. Weischer slapped his face, but he didn't hit his face, only his helmet. He began to suspect that his bad luck had returned once again. However, as he roared, a sound wave suddenly swept past the truck and slapped the giant spider's face. In an instant, dozens of truck-sized pieces of armor and a large pile of mechanical parts fell from the giant spider's face. The spider hissed, but it didn't spit out such an exaggerated wave. Instead, waves of silver gray mist rose from its complicated limbs and body, surging toward the mechanical centipede. Once the mist-like gray substance landed on the huge pillars and steel, sizzling sounds would be heard, corroding large amounts of holes and depressions in everything, making one's scalp go numb. And just as the two monsters were fighting for some reason, the truck was already like a lucky moth, madly running away without looking back, running as far as it could. After running for an unknown number of kilometers, Weischer still felt a faint premonition of death, not knowing what other damned monsters were hiding in the surroundings. But at some point in time, the area illuminated by the lowered searchlights had gradually changed. It was as if they had rushed into a giant's factory. Below, an assembly line that was as wide as a road was covered in dust. Huge and strange machines sat in the middle of the assembly line, and all sorts of unimaginably large buildings sat in between the countless huge pillars. When looking down from the top, one could see countless sliding rails in the air, as if they were paved for trains, but it had been a long time since there were any trains coming and going. No matter how long they drove, it was difficult to see the end of this factory. The entire dilapidated factory was covered in dust. There were no traces left behind from when this place used to work, and there weren't even any huge monsters lurking in the darkness. Only countless strange devices and production lines of unknown meanings were left behind underground. Where is this? Weischer climbed out of the cockpit and looked down. He scanned the surroundings, but he couldn't see anything clearly. I think the depth is 2,572 meters. The location is probably between the D7 and D8 zones. Raymond nodded after confirming it several times. It should be within the range estimated by the Iron Crystal constellation. The branch control center's signal should be coming from around here. But where's the branch control center? Weischer scratched his helmet and looked around blankly, unable to understand. Such a large branch control center should be visible to the naked eye, but no matter how many drones were released, all they could see was this silent factory. There was nothing that looked like the branch control center. Huaishir and Raymond wandered around here for a full 6 hours, circling from inside to outside several times, but they didn't find any clues at all. Even if Huaishir mustered up his courage and threw a few bombs down, other than some slight damage to the strange giant machines, there was still no sign of anything. Even if Huaishir took a huge risk and sent the park guards to other corners of the factory to search, there was still no news. If only it was on the ground. If it was dusk, Huaishir could at least release a flock of crows. But here, there wasn't enough fuel to distribute to every single crow, and the candlelight crows were all in their Gundams, so there was no way to tell them apart. After Huaishir's detection, not only was the scope of the huge factory not clear, but it had now expanded to the size of a large city. It was even connected to other giant machines that protruded from the ceiling, walls, and underground. I have bad news for you. After a nap, Raymond opened his eyes and said, "We still have about 20 hours of fuel left. But considering the time it takes to return and the impact of the outside environment, we have to reserve 7 hours of fuel. This is already the minimum amount of fuel we have. In other words, we only have 13 hours left to explore." Huaishir felt a headache coming on when he thought about the situation outside and didn't know if the operation on the other side was going smoothly. His headache became even worse. Still can't contact the Iron Crystal constellation? No, the power of the car transmitter is still too low. It can't penetrate the thickness of the ground. With so many curses in between, the original origin substance signal can't be used. The communication has basically been cut off. Huaishir wanted to pull out his hair even more. But just as he was at his wit's end, he saw a seed in the bottle that was thrown in the car quietly tremble, and a new sprout sprouted. His movements paused for a moment. "What's wrong?" Raymond asked. "It sprouted." Huaishir pointed at the seed in the bottle and frowned. "When I sent out the guards to explore, I had them bring some seeds out. Then, after these seeds sprouted, they could form a miniature ecological network. You can think of it as me setting up a local area network here. Once any external data enters, I can immediately discover it. Oh, an alarm, right?" Raymond thought for a long time and slapped his head. He had found the most direct way to understand it. Actually, that's right. Limited by his ability, Huaishir's vitality network couldn't provide too many changes. It had already taken him a long time to send a signal when it sensed the presence of an external species. Raymond's reaction was to immediately turn off the external lights. Then, he turned on the camouflage device, completely blocking the heat source of the car's engine and the light source from the inside. The entire car was stuck to the ceiling like dust. It was as if it had turned into stone. There was no more sound. Not long after, they heard the faint sound of an engine in the distance. The huge aircraft whizzed over, but there were countless small drones that were even faster than the aircraft. After searching around, they almost brushed past them. After circling around a few times, the large aircraft quickly landed. A sublimator from the Ivy League walked out with a wind lantern in hand. Behind him were 2 sublimators wearing the same armor. One is Bloodkiss, and the other is a newbie. "I don't know him," Raymond whispered. "The guy from Bloodkiss is the most insidious. Don't think that he's strong just because he's carrying a big gun. He's best at using curses and poisons." "What are you laughing at?" "Nothing. I just thought of something funny." Huaishir covered his mouth and waved his hand. Go on, go on." "It seems that guy's stigmata still hasn't made any breakthroughs. The rank 3 stigmata of the Celtic family Evil eye, together with gaze, can add a lot of curses and poisons to the enemy. People often die inexplicably while fighting with him. As for the other one, I don't know him. You have to be careful. Blood Kiss has a very bad temper. Those who can walk in front of him are most likely stronger than him. As for the equipment, let me see. The upgraded exploration formation and configuration. 6 motorcycles, 2 aircraft, 41 official members, and additional hellish groups, but it should still be Salamander. The number is conservatively estimated to be less than 70 to 80. If there are more, we won't be able to carry so much fuel for them as a reward. With Raymond, the traitor, all the configuration and tactics of the Eye of Nightmare were sold out by him. Moreover, he even provided more than 3 kinds of ambush tactics for Huaishur to choose from. When Huaishur asked him to help with the battle, this guy acted like a driver and refused to go to the battlefield, even if he was beaten to death. Don't force me. Raymond waved his hand shyly. After all, they're former colleagues. How can I do it? No, you were about to sell out all the details of your colleagues just now. The 2 of them quickly stopped talking in a low voice. Through the binoculars, Huaishur saw that the Ivy League member, who was protected in the innermost part, opened the box and took out a huge glass jar from it. It was filled with amber liquid, and soaked in the liquid was a dead person's head. What's that? He narrowed his eyes and was about to take a closer look when he saw the Ivy League member shouting at the head in the jar, and the head opened its eyes. It opened its mouth. She began to sing. Chapter 556. Huaishur felt a wave of dizziness. The moment the head in the jar opened its mouth, he heard a low chant in his trance. It seemed to burst out from his soul with the opening and closing of her lips. The dizziness came suddenly, but then Huaishur woke up from this strange trance. Next to him, Raymond was already laughing foolishly, immersed in this strange melody. He even reached out to pull the joystick to start the truck. Huaishur raised his hand and slapped on his helmet, trying to wake him up. Fearing that this blow was not powerful enough, he even used the drummer's technique. Through the helmet, Huaishur's power suddenly exploded in the air inside and slapped on Raymond's face. It was like a slap in the face, causing him to twitch and smack his lips. Suddenly, he went from being intoxicated to being dull, revealing an ordinary expression. After a long time, he realized that he had just been bewitched. Then his expression changed. He heard the sound of something breaking in the engine. In that strange song, his truck actually ignored his will and warmed up on its own, ready to start. Raymond's expression suddenly changed. He reached out and pressed on the dashboard, forcibly stopping the truck from starting on its own. It was as if he was in a tug-of-war with someone. His face was ashen. In the end, the disguise was not broken, and their position was not exposed. But a violent roar burst out with the strange song. From all directions, heaven and earth shook violently, and countless huge pillars shook off dust. Ashes rose from the ground along with a hurricane that appeared out of thin air, rustling and dancing. Under the illumination of the searchlight, it seemed to come alive. But it was not only the dust that came alive. And this dead, silent world, in all directions, in the deepest part of the darkness, roars and roars came. Then there was a sharp friction sound that made one's scalp tingle. 1 pair, 2 pairs, 3 pairs, until finally countless crazy eyes lit up in the darkness. As the song spread, all the steel monsters roared furiously and rushed toward them. The ferocious mechanical centipedes rode on countless blade-like legs and rushed toward them. At their closest, they were only a dozen meters away from Huaishur and the others. His long body rumbled forward like a train. After a few minutes, Huaisher finally saw the tip of its tail. Then came the giant steel spider, stepping on the fine steel wires and arriving like a ghost. Then a gigantic pair of wings flapped soundlessly like a moth flying over a building, and a city-sized thundercloud abruptly descended. It was like a steel monster exhibition. Centipedes, spiders, moths, reptiles, and even metal mosquitoes that filled the sky formed an iron cloud. Under the influence of the song, they roared angrily, but they did not attack each other or the people of Ivy League. They only resisted in every possible way, trying to break free from the shackles of the song, but it was too late. The song had already entered too deep into their consciousness, completely dominating their minds. He did not forcefully interfere or issue any orders. It was a gentle call, calling for their return, accompanied by the sharp sound of metal rubbing against each other. The 10,000-ton giant gate slowly opened. The spasming mechanical centipede drilled into it, as if a component had returned to its original position. Then, the spider flung off its cumbersome legs and merged into the huge production line. In the sound of the gigantic pair of wings twisting, the moth fell from the sky, twitching and struggling, and fell into the huge jar that opened where it came from, where it went. When the giant monsters returned to their original positions one by one, the silent factory world was activated with a loud bang. Countless crisscrossing lights suddenly lit up, illuminating the dead underground world. The huge production line began to move slowly. Countless tiny indicator lights flashed in an orderly manner, restarting the huge production machinery. This place had come alive. In the jar, the human head finally closed its mouth, but its face instantly aged by dozens of years. Its hair was graying, and it was obvious that it had exhausted its strength. But there was no need for its power next, because the entire factory had begun to operate again. I see. On the driver's seat, the projection of the Grandmaster suddenly flashed, giving Huaisher a fright. It's just an emergency communication device. Don't be like an ignorant country bumpkin. The burly Grandmaster crossed his arms and glanced at Huaisher. Then the illusory projection reached out and snatched the binoculars from Huaisher's hands. Then he looked out the window. That human head should be the result of an imitation that they've been working on for the past few years. The Song of Awakening can forcibly activate the mechanisms of the infernal realm. So, what's going on with this factory? Huaisher asked, what kind of strategic weapons are they planning to produce? The things they produce are similar, but not strategic weapons. The Grandmaster calmly put down the binoculars and looked back. Haven't you thought this huge factory is actually a part of the subcontrol center? What? Huaisher was dumbfounded. So big. So, it's a part of the exterior. No, to be precise, it's the process of producing the subcontrol center. The Grandmaster proudly announced, the real subcontrol center is probably still in the state of parts stored in every part of the production line. Only when the assembly is completed can it have the function of a subcontrol center. Can it be like this? Huaisher looked at the earth-shattering scene outside the window, dumbfounded. With the resumption of production, the huge underground factory had been completely revived at this moment. Countless huge machines were operating loudly, allowing the complicated assembly line to produce countless parts and structures with indistinguishable functions. On the sliding rails between the huge pillars, countless huge cranes and transport vehicles were galloping back and forth at every moment. Hundreds of thousands of huge machines, tens of thousands of production lines, following the preset procedures thousands of years ago, began to operate again. Hot steel emerged from the furnace water, and huge hammers fell from the sky. Ear-piercing roars converged into a tide, swallowing everything. Under the operation of countless huge structures, countless complicated high walls and pillars rapidly grew from the assembly line. In the end, accompanied by the changes in the terrain and the world-shaking operation, a huge behemoth slowly rose from the rapidly self-destructing production line. It was a majestic and sacred palace, like a temple to worship the Holy Spirit. But before the countless thick shells were sealed, the inside was a maze created by machines, and the outlines and bodies of countless steel monsters could be vaguely seen. With so many strange monsters as the foundation, what was produced was probably a creepy devil's den, right? Now, even this huge palace was like a mechanical clock, slowly rotating. Every module was moving along the guide rails in an orderly manner, and its shape was constantly changing. Sometimes it would form an absolutely standard cube, and sometimes it would turn into an inverted pyramid. The huge structure that extended from the ceiling and the floor had been integrated into its body, like a heart that was finally buried in the chest, fusing together without any gaps. "Okay, it's your turn." Before dissipating, the Grand Master calmly said, "There's only one request, and that is to bring back the sub-control center." Easy for you to say. Huaisher stared. "Including the guards. There are only about 10 of us. How can we bring it back?" "To be exact, it's 10, Raymond added, removing himself from the number of people. "How would I know? You are already mature tools. You should learn to think of your own ways." In the gradually dissipating projection, the Grand Master glanced at Huaisher and suddenly grinned. "If you ask me, aren't you very popular?" At this point, the projection suddenly dissipated. Huaisher and Raymond were left looking at each other. "Did he just say that we are tools?" Yes, I heard it." Raymond patted him on the shoulder. "Be more confident. Remove the question mark, and the word 'we' can also be removed. So you're really determined not to work, right?" "I still have to drive." Raymond's expression became serious. "You have to bring us along at a critical time. What an important responsibility. You can't be distracted." "All right." Huaisher rolled his eyes, picked up the binoculars, and looked at the entrance of the strange palace below. What was incredible was that although it had just been built, the huge palace now looked like it had been through the vicissitudes of life. It was puzzling. Could it be that in addition to production and assembly, this production line also included making old things? Was this branch control center some kind of super large relic manufacturing machine? He could not figure it out. At the entrance, after the people from the Ivy League put away the heads, the 2 teams from the Eye of Nightmare had already skillfully put on all kinds of equipment. After leaving a portion of people to lead a large group of people to guard the outside, they walked towards the entrance. Not only did the people guarding the outside not slack off at all, but they also released a large number of drones in addition to Salamander. They hovered around, not letting go of any abnormalities. The drones were also in a preheated state, ready to take off at any time. They were on guard against any attacks. After experiencing many wars, these guys were too experienced. Unless they were stubborn and chose to attack head-on, Huaisher could not find any place to attack. However, as he watched, Huaisher suddenly felt his scalp go numb. He suddenly turned his gaze and looked at the top of the Temple of Changes. On the sharp tip of the tower, a figure wearing a solemn and magnificent robe had appeared at some point in time. On the long robe, the magnificent robe made of silver and gold threads was engraved with the sacred emblem of the sun. He wore a 6-layered crown on his head, and under the crown was a skeletal face made of metal. Now, the pitch-black eye sockets were looking down at everything under his feet. Suddenly, he raised his head and looked at Huaisher. The moment Huaisher fell into a state of shock, the solemn skeleton gradually disappeared into the air. However, before it left, it casually raised its hand and pointed down. It gave an order. Suddenly, the Temple of Changes rumbled and expanded rapidly. It spread out in all directions at a speed comparable to that of an explosion. The metal turned into a tide and swept across. In an instant, it expanded hundreds of times. It wanted to swallow everything into its stomach. Sure subconsciously wanted to tell Raymond to run, but it was already too late. His vision turned black. When he opened his eyes, he saw an unfamiliar ceiling, gorgeous reliefs, and countless murals. He even saw the soft carpet under him. This scene was too strange. It was as if a smoking man was beside him and saying, "You are the best among the newcomers this time." This was bad. Sure sucked in a breath of cold air and began to think carefully and rationally. Did I King transmigrate? Chapter 5:57. Did I transmigrate? After a brief moment of sluggishness, Sure pressed his aching head and touched his helmet. He subconsciously raised his hand and looked at the indicator on his wrist. After confirming that there were no curses nearby, he finally took off his helmet and breathed in the not-so-fresh air. He could smell the smell of decay and dust, just like the smell of an old house. Sure was too familiar with this smell. The surrounding situation was like a gorgeous room in a villa with exquisite furnishings and luxurious displays. It was completely different from the scene in the truck just now. Calm down. Sure? He scratched his head and subconsciously opened the Book of Destiny, trying to organize his thoughts. There was no record in the Book of Destiny at all. In other words, he was still in hell. He did not leave the Twilight Village. Then, connecting with the previous memory, this was the inside of the palace-shaped center. Recalling that cold figure, Sure suddenly realized something. Did that skeleton pull me into the branch control center with a flick of his finger? Just as he was looking around, he found that the park guards behind him had also woken up from their temporary coma and were looking around blankly. However, he could not see Raymond. He did not know if he was lucky not to be pulled in, or he had run away, or he was simply thrown to another place. According to the time, they had fainted and woke up less than 2 minutes ago. When Sure bent down and pressed her palm on the floor, she felt a faint rhythm. It was the sound of countless metals changing, the sound that the hand of confinement felt. There was no doubt that even at this moment, this huge palace was still constantly changing. This proved that Sure's judgment was not wrong. They were indeed already in the subcontrol center. Sure suddenly breathed a sigh of relief. Very good. It seems that I have made a mistake. Wait, if that is the case. He pinched his chin and began to think. I entered the subcontrol center when I was in hell, and then accidentally got sent into the subcontrol center. This 3-layer doll dungeon is really King enough. After thinking for a long time, he turned around and looked at the guards behind him. Do you have any leads? In the armor, the park guards looked at each other, then responded in unison. Holy! Sure nodded. Very good. I think so too. Thus, the park guards responded in unison. Holy! It seemed that he could no longer rely on these repeaters to give him advice. Or rather, Sure would be satisfied as long as the crows didn't go around flipping through the things on the iron crystal pedestal and picked up some random things for herself. 2 days ago, the purser came to Sure and said earnestly, "You've been in hell for a week, and more than half of the goldies that the Pharaoh Crystal members secretly brought up have been lost. A few people have told me that these thieves are too arrogant. Do you have any leads?" Sure could only say, "How the hell would I know?" Then, in order to prevent his reputation from being damaged, he finally decided to be ruthless and eradicate this unhealthy trend from the crows. In the end, for some reason, after these guys lost the goldies to read, they began to read them every day. It was really annoying. He only hoped that one day, when little 19 found that there were hundreds of Cheen magazines under his bed that did not belong to him, Ahem, he would be able to calm down. Huaishur did not realize that he had gradually become the person he used to hate. He calmly put this matter to the back of his mind. With the repeaters, they began to search the room. They found nothing. This seemed to be a study room. It looked quaint, but in fact, there were not many books that could survive such a long time. All of them had been turned into ashes. The better ones were just outlines, but they would shatter with a touch. Only a few pieces of iron and stone slabs could survive, but the words written on them had not appeared in the present world, let alone with Huaishur's level of understanding. It was good enough that he did not throw them away. He could only take photos and save them first, then put them into the sample box and bring them back to the iron crystal seat. After searching twice, he confirmed that there were no mechanisms or traps here, but he could not find anything. There was only one last choice left. Let's go out and take a look. Huaishur took a deep breath and made up his mind. Holy! The giant rat men of the park guards shouted in unison happily, as if everyone was going out to participate in a Goldie exhibition or a party. There was no sense of crisis at all. They could not be serious. Huaishur sighed, reached out, and gently opened the door. Then he saw an empty corridor. At the other end of the corridor, the door was opened at the same time, and the figure covered in heavy armor behind the door gap. The Eye of Nightmare. If Huaishur remembered correctly, that was Raymond's old friend, Samson of the Blood Kiss. Their eyes met. For a moment, everyone was immersed in this wonderful meeting, and suddenly felt inexplicably touched. In this seemingly frozen time, they looked at each other in shock, not knowing why such a thing suddenly jumped out in front of them. However, whether it was the premonition of death or so many years of experience, they would not let this moment last too long. The moment they confirmed each other, they leaned back at the same time without hesitation and jumped back. They pulled out their guns in the air, aimed at the place, and pulled the trigger repeatedly. Amidst the roar of the gunshots, the sound of steel rubbing against each other burst forth. The silent park guards suddenly moved. As the direct race of the young arbiter of life's stigmata, there was no barrier between the crows of Candle and Huaishur. Huaishur could give an order as long as his mind moved. It only took less than 1 second for him to run wildly from a standstill to a mad dash. The burly greater rat guards suddenly pounced forward, raised the large shield in their hands, and blocked the Blood Kiss's gunshot head-on. The Blood Kiss's luck was not as good as Huaishur's. This was because Huaishur's reaction was just a little faster than his by a little. The lightning reflexes brought about by the mountain ghost's 4 realizations allowed him to enter a calm state at any time and react as quickly as possible. Just like now, the moment Huaishur's finger pulled the trigger, the bullet had already flown out amidst Beelzebub's happy laughter. The alchemy bullet let out a roar that sounded like a cannon. It tore through the opponent's door lock like a hot knife through butter. It didn't stop or change direction at all. After it made a hole the size of a wash basin on the door, it directly hit Blood Kiss' chest. Then, the Blood Kiss flew out in midair. It was like a wooden stake hit by a cannon head-on. Huaishur could almost see the deformation of his armor bit by bit. Then, a layer of light appeared, forcibly blocking the bullet for a moment. Immediately afterward, as he landed on the ground, the armor covering his entire body quickly collapsed into iron sand. Was this a deliberate design? Huaishur suddenly understood. Using the design of self-destruction at the critical moment to block a sure-death attack for the user, there was no time to think about it. The moment his heels landed, he suddenly lowered his body and stepped forward. The people who were faster than him were the park guards. Before Huaishur landed, the 3 guards at the front suddenly gathered together. The huge shields in their hands were put together. They ignored the narrow door frame in front of them and pushed forward. FBI, up in Theodore. Accompanied by a thunderous roar, the fragile wall broke with a loud bang. Amidst the flying dust, the running park guards instantly crossed the corridor, smashed the wall, and smashed into the room opposite. In the room, as the blood kiss landed, the eyes of Nightmare, who had just raised their guard, did not have time to react before they saw the wall collapse. They also saw the huge shields that had merged together and pressed down on them like an iron wall. The hurricane howled, and the ferocious shadows of the guards appeared from the dancing dust. Following closely behind, the modified Ratman who had pulled out the huge chain blade had already pulled out the string. Accompanied by the high-pitched sound of the chain blade spinning violently, it pounced on the opponents in the room. It was as if they had practiced this countless times. The cooperation between them was flawless. The surprise attack was completed in one go, and the fiery wind swept through all piracy. The roaring chain blade had already slashed down, causing a spray of blood. Some people who reacted quickly had already picked up their weapons and blocked the sudden slash. However, he saw the guard pull out a shotgun from his waist with his other hand and aim it at his face. He pulled the trigger. Boom! A rain of blood poured down. Amidst the roar, Huaishi's figure had already shot over like lightning. The hammer of pain in his hand spewed out flames, crushing the air and smashing it at Bloodkiss, who had just landed on the ground. In a hurry, the two heavy handles and Bloodkiss's hands suddenly joined together. Then, the sharp body of the gun shot out from it and aimed at Huaishi's face. At the last moment, he had won this short opportunity by perishing together with Huaishi. He bounced up from the ground, and a scarlet light suddenly shot out from his eyes and shone on Huaishi. Huaishi sneezed. He did not even stop moving. He aimed at Bloodkiss's face and slashed out with the axe of wrath. The unique skill that he was so proud of was actually useless. In an instant of shock, Bloodkiss raised the steel gun in his hand, wanting to block Huaishi's axe blade. However, under the burning anger on the axe blade, it was instantly defeated. Then, the axe blade went straight for his head. However, the crisis of death suddenly burst forth. From behind, the floor under Huaishi's feet suddenly cracked. Using used steps, he moved 1 meter to the left without warning. Then, a bronze sword inlaid with golden stone teeth flew out and brushed past Huaishi's back. It stopped in midair. Wherever it passed, even the air was torn, producing sharp ripples. Marquette. It was one of the proudest weapons of the Aztec skinning warriors. Huaishi instantly turned around and stabbed the Sword of Virtue behind him. At this moment, the blade of the Sword of Virtue suddenly burst out with a burst of brilliance, as if it had met an old enemy. The brilliance actually tore apart the layer of mist around the attacker's body, revealing a graceful figure. Under the armor that also covered the body, the slender figure in armor took a step and jumped back like a cheetah, barely dodging the tip of the sword. Then, the figure became illusory, breaking through the air. It appeared in front of Huaishi without warning. There was no gap, and it did not leave any space for Huaishi to dodge. It was a nearly fatal stab. On the bronze sword, countless golden stone teeth shone brightly. Like a fierce beast, it opened its mouth, swallowed, and erupted with a terrifying gravitational force, pulling Huaishi towards death. Huaishi only felt a chill run down his spine. Countless phantoms suddenly separated from his body and shattered under the stone-edged sword's piercing. But then, Huaishi, who was in front of the stone-edged sword, disappeared into thin air, just like she did just now. Then, a sharp scratch suddenly burst open on her iron helmet. The sacrificial knife stabbed out like a viper, but it did not hit. It quickly retreated with Huaishi Only the knife's blade was crying out hungrily. Ferocity erupted. The knife of the skinning lord, as the iron helmet shattered, a beautiful face was revealed from the armor, under the bright golden hair. The girl's green eyes burst out with a blazing light, majestic and cold. She exuded a terrifying deterrence from her bloodline. "You dare not kneel when you see me?" she coldly rebuked. "Tell me your name, unclean one." Chapter 558. What the hell? In the midst of the chaotic battle, Huaishir was taken aback. Glancing at the sacrificial knife in his hand, he was immediately amused. Only then did he realize that the other party was treating him as her underling. After all, in the American lineage, the followers of the Lord of Skinning were a group of old foxes who could not be seen in public. The most famous of them were assassins who came out to do the dirty work. Among them, their best skill was to peel off the skin of the other party, then drape it over their body and disguise themselves as the other party. And the one in front of him, Huaishir glanced at the marcovet that was originally misidentified as the standard weapon of the Skinning Templars. He could basically conclude that it was a rare stigmata relic, and the smoke surrounding her was probably a rare relic from the border, from the sense of death he felt from the other party. Combined with the other party's hand just now, it was clear that this was a strong enemy. Combined with her arrogance just now, it could be concluded that her status in the American lineage was probably not low. Before you let others sign up, isn't it better to introduce yourself first? Coldly glancing at the gloomy bloody kiss who was not far away, Huaishir looked at the girl in front of him and raised his eyebrows slightly. Feeling Huaishir's contempt, the girl holding the stone sword raised her head and solemnly announced, "I am the messenger of the current and current lord, Tazcatripica, illuminated by the afterglow of the first sun, the manifestation of divine power from the earth, inheritor of noble blood, and high priest, Liz Hetmok, the high priest of the first sun." Huaishir was stunned for a long time. His eyes widened as he looked carefully. He did not expect to see a seeded player of the American lineage and a Tier 5 candidate in the Ivy League team among the Aztec Ennead. As the king of eternal darkness, the god who once incarnated as the first sun, Tazcatripica undoubtedly had an extremely high status. As the inheritor of noble blood and high priest of Tazcatripica, this was almost equivalent to the status of Yi Shuya's group in the Eastern Summer lineage. Within the Aztecs, the two main representatives of the American lineage, all ascenders would receive the blessings left behind by the gods of the past the moment they achieved their ascension. The fact that he was favored by the first son was enough to prove his opponent's talent. At the same time, he also felt that it was getting more and more troublesome. What happened? Liz Hetmok's eyes were filled with mockery. "Are you afraid now? Since you've stolen this blade of the Skinning Lord from who knows where, you should know how to be respectful. If you surrender without a fight, I can give you preferential treatment on account of your pretty face." "No, you really don't know me?" Huaishir was a little stunned as she pointed at herself. "You." Liz frowned. "Why should I know about you? What? Are you famous?" She had never heard of him before. For some reason, Huaishir suddenly felt a sense of defeat. Although being famous gave him a headache, he had to admit that he had always felt pretty good about it. Now that he had met someone he had never even heard of, Huaishir did not know what to do or how to deal with it. "Ha! Woman, I have to admit that you've successfully attracted my attention." Bumpkin from the countryside. Listen up. Just as Huaishir was about to speak, Beelzebub, who had been ignored by him all this time, suddenly jumped out of his backpack and said in a loud voice, "In front of you is Exion High's chief Red Stick of the Astronomy Society, an action officer with an internal rating of S, a registered inspector, a prince of paradise, a legendary investigator, a calamity musician, the abyss cooking demon, the king of backstabbers, the source of the giant abyssal beast, Bahamut, the anointed one, the red idol road, the ivory tower's most popular new teacher of the year, the classical music lecturer, the overlord of scumbags, the scum of heroes, the traitor of traitors, Mr. Why Sure. Then he shouted at the top of his lungs, "You're surrounded. You've already been surrounded. Hurry up and surrender." There was a sudden silence. Why Sure, Liz Hetmock, Bloody Kiss, Eye of Nightmare, Paradise Guards. Holy! Although they could not figure out what had happened, the guards did not care so much. No matter what happened, holiness was the end of it. Liz was stunned on the spot. She was shocked. He didn't expect the enemy in front of him to announce such a long list of titles. It seemed to be quite awe-inspiring and powerful. Although there seemed to be a few bad words mixed in, it seemed quite awesome. Could it be that the other party was really a big shot, and she had become a bumpkin after being isolated in the 9th campus for so many years? She looked at Bloody Kiss in confusion. "Don't listen to his nonsense." Bloody Kiss said with hatred, "How powerful is he with so many ridiculous titles? He's just a pretty boy." In just a short encounter, his team had suffered heavy losses, losing 16 people. Now, his hatred for Why Sure was almost overflowing. Liz was stunned when she heard this. She looked at Why Sure's face again, and her expression became serious and solemn. After a while, she nodded. "Yes, he is indeed quite good-looking." Bloody Kiss was stunned for a long time. His face was ashen, and he did not spit out a mouthful of blood. Who knew what kind of spring this Ivy League woman was in? "Hey, you should be called Why Sure, right?" Liz raised her head and said loudly, "Are you interested in coming to the Ivy League? I'm lacking an assistant. Seeing that you're quite skilled, I'll give you a chance." Why Sure showed a businesslike smile. "What a coincidence. If you're willing to come to the Ivory Tower, I'm still lacking a student." But unexpectedly, Liz seemed to be considering it. "The Ivory Tower?" She nodded. I wonder if, at that moment, the chill of the premonition of death hit him in the face. Without any warning, the bone-burying sanctuary suddenly exploded, and rolling darkness swept across. A blood-curdling scream followed closely behind. Bloody Kiss staggered back, and there was the sound of something breaking under the armor. In the end, a line of blood flowed down from the corner of his eyes, and the pair of eyes that were originally filled with evil light began to crack. The curse that he had been secretly brewing for a long time was actually reflected back, bringing double the backlash. And Liz Hetmock's figure had already disappeared from the spot. Then she fell from the sky, just like a falcon swooping down. The stone sword was filled with killing intent, and it slashed down again. There was almost no pause or warning. The moment she moved, Why Sure had already fallen into the cage of killing intent. Why Sure hurriedly retreated, using used steps. However, when he steadied himself 10 meters away, the blade of the stone serrated sword was still hanging high above his head. In fact, it was already very close. Why Sure's pupils contracted. Damn it! Sneak attacks, backstabs, and sneak attacks all day long. But today he was actually hit by someone. He had almost failed miserably at such an easy task. The hammer of pain soared into the sky and smashed on the stone sword's blade. However, the sharp stone sword seemed to be condensed by something even more terrifying. The hammer that was created by the pain of hundreds of thousands of lizardmen could not be shaken at all. The huge force was deflected by an even bigger force. Why Sure's attack failed, and he seemed to have given up on resisting. However, in the shadow behind him, a sneaky old man suddenly appeared, holding a heavy pistol, and pointed it at Liz's face. "Lord of the Flies, trial mode, full release." The dark green crystal was instantly activated, and it set off a soul-shaking roar. The power that was enough to pierce through the double helix secret instrument's frame gathered together, and then suddenly spread out, almost covering Liz's entire body. It suddenly burst out. However, the smoke that surrounded Liz instantly condensed into a strange and terrifying mask, blocking the light of Lord of the Flies. The next moment, countless fine cracks appeared on the mask. However, the destructive light of judgment had actually turned around and returned. The sluggish old man was burned to ashes before he could react. Seizing this critical moment, Weisher fiercely launched a counterattack. Brilliant flames condensed in his hand, and the tip of the spear that was wrapped in the fragrance of iris flowers whizzed out and collided with the stone sword again. Triple drummer, thunderbolt. The floor under Weisher's feet suddenly rippled and was torn apart by the huge force. Weisher forced himself to use this move that he had not completely mastered, and his fingers were already cracking inch by inch. However, in the explosive roar, the spear wrapped in poison swung away the stone sword. Ignoring the wound on his arm, he stabbed towards Liz's chest, and his speed increased again, as if he had turned into a real thunderbolt. It pierced through Liz's chest. Unfortunately, he did not feel the joy of piercing through someone's heart. There was a strange flash. Once again, Liz Hurtmoke appeared in the distance. Before she could recover from her shock, the wound on her chest started to bleed green. She was heavily injured. Then, the spear of compassion dissipated in the air and was replaced by the sword of virtue. Weisher rushed forward, step by step. He finally recognized the holy mark hidden in Liz's body. It was one of the 5 incarnations of the first sun, Tazika Tripoca in the human world. The wind of impermanence, the leopard man, the smoke mirror, the magic eagle, and the magic eagle of the great sorcerers. It could also be called left hummingbird, the left hummingbird that led to the god of war, Visilobacatelli, the terrifying power that was not inferior to any other sorcerers of the same level, the strange and frequent flashes, and the strange miracles attached to the stone sword were probably all the extensions of this holy mark. After the stone sword was severely damaged, she had been poisoned, and the mask that protected her body was on the verge of breaking. She was at her weakest state. At this time, Weisher did not have any thoughts of showing mercy to her. Instead, he stared at her neck and felt an indescribable desire to kill. Such a strong enemy should be given the highest level of respect in such a resolute way. In the blink of an eye, Liz didn't retreat at all. Instead, she revealed an almost fanatical smile on her blood-stained face. The stone sword in her hand roared, and with the help of the holy mark, the shadow of a curved snake staff faintly appeared. She left the serious injury behind. She did not retreat a single step and brazenly attacked Weisher. Before that, a violent shock covered everything. The world was spinning. The whole world seemed to have suddenly turned 180 degrees, and countless mechanical modules suddenly appeared in the ruined room. With this violent change, a thick iron wall fell from the sky and isolated the 2 sides in an instant. The operation was violent. At this time, the huge palace unexpectedly ushered in another change. "Damn it!" Liz roared, and the burning stone sword suddenly slashed down and tore a gap in the wall. But except for the rapidly changing room and countless operating machines, she could not find Weisher. "Come back!" The high priestess who inherited the noble blood of the gods clenched her weapon, and regardless of the spreading poison, she could not restrain her fury. "Come back, bastard!" Such a satisfying battle was interrupted. There was nothing more humiliating to a warrior than this. She clearly looked like a petite girl, but at this moment she was roaring like a lion and could not restrain herself from destroying everything in the room. Only after several rooms were smashed into ruins did she stop. She roared towards the ceiling several times and finally calmed down. Her footsteps paused slightly, and she held the dimmed sword, gasping for breath. Under the suppression of the holy mark, the dark green poison that had spread to her neck could no longer spread, and she needed treatment. Don't worry, Miss Liz. Why get angry because of a dying person? Schwewin walked forward and looked down at the remaining drops of blood on the floor and suddenly sneered. That was the blood left by Weisher. It was also a necessary material and condition for the blood curse. Although ordinary poisons and curses were ineffective, the power of the evil eye was not limited to that. Even if it could not be seen, it still had the power to torture a fourth-order ascendant. A cold wind suddenly rose. His eyes lit up with a dark green gloomy light. Then he bent down, pulled out a dagger, and scooped up the drop of blood on the floor. Pretty boy, this is your last mistake before you die. Chanting an incantation from hell, he stretched out his tongue that was full of vicious incantations and swallowed the drop of blood into his stomach. As if he was swallowing a fresh life, he let out a carefree moan. He completed the last step of the curse. In the gradually rising, terrifying malice, Schwewin could not help but grin. He's already dead. That you're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.